So, how did we get here?
Hello, everybody. So
Hello,
here we are. This is
I am
Mariam,
Mariam. Hello, I am Mariam.
and
Nice to
my
meet
name's
you.
Matt.
This is a message from the future, you guys. We just had a fantastic podcast
Yeah,
interview,
we just
and
spent like almost 4 hours talking to each other.
not enough horror all
I
day
know,
or
I know.
day.
So welcome, hello, everybody. This is the Discovering People podcast. My name's Matt. This is my guest Mariam for today. This is a conversation series about the question, how did we get here? Each episode is a deep portrait of a different person's world, views, and biography. And what we want to achieve at its core is to inspire for you more empathy and understanding. So we hope that for you, by encountering strangers in this way, you can discover insights and perspectives for your own lives. Yeah, today we're talking to Mariam, who's a very good friend of mine. Today, actually, we're going to talk a lot about horror because she is active in the horror industry, in the horror genre. She's a very big fan, and she's also running a service provider company. And yeah, we're going to talk about your career, how you got to do what you're doing today. And we're going to talk about lucid dreaming and sleep paralysis. So that's going to be fun. Then we're going to talk about how you grew into the entertainment industry and how through networking you made that part of who you are today. How you started out your company by making music for horror. We're going to talk about horror sound design and psychology, and then how the horror community and just horror as a genre can be something that helps you deal with things in your life, with trauma, also dealing with mental illness. So horror as a way of coping,
Coping.
as a coping mechanism, and as a way of handling life better. Something that not everybody might consider. So those are our subjects for today. We didn't talk about hot dogs. Sorry about that. You're going to know in a
Yeah, because
moment
we
that
did a
we
prediction.
wanted
You'll
to.
see it in a moment. We
You'll see
predicted.
exactly. We'll see
You'll
the
see in a
prediction
moment
in a moment.
how we went awry. But
Yeah.
yes, I am Mariam Michael Jager of the company Headcinema Productions. I am a co-host and co-producer for the show The Grimm Exchange, which you can check out on YouTube. And I hope you guys have fun with our extended, interesting, invigorating interview and conversation about all things spooky and dark. We sure did. So make sure to like, subscribe, and enjoy this dialogue.
Start recording. There we are. Hello, Mariam.
Hey.
How's it going? And hello, everybody. Thanks for
I'm
joining.
good.
Yeah?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. How are you?
Um,
Good. The sun is shining.
I know,
No
it's so
complaints. Got a fresh
beautiful.
cup of coffee. Life
Right?
is good.
And over here in Saarbrücken, today, apparently, it's supposed to go up to 18 degrees Celsius, which is, I
Oh,
don't know
how
what in Fahrenheit.
typical for mid-November.
Yeah, exactly. There's no problem here.
No
Certainly, climate
problem.
change is obviously not happening. So,
What climate change? What are
yeah,
you talking
exactly.
about?
Right. So today we're doing something new, actually, because at the end of this podcast, we are going to record the short video snippet that you, as a viewer, just watched. So we don't know that video snippet yet, but you do. It's sort of like a weird time loop horror movie type of thing, you know, where somebody's stuck in a time loop and you get to see stuff that's in our future. Exactly. We're going to have a short snippet because somebody, I think it was you, wasn't it you? Somebody told me, why don't you have a snippet at the beginning of your podcast where you tell people what the podcast is going to be about? Because if somebody's going to sit through 3 hours of inane babbling, my words, not theirs, you know, at least they want to know, they should know at the beginning what the podcast is going to be about. So you and I,
We
Mariam,
could do a prediction, you know, we
could
could
do it,
actually
yeah.
record, but let's predict.
That's true. We
What
should
is this
predict now.
conversation going to be about? Okay,
Yeah.
so I predict we are going to talk about horror.
Yeah, we are.
And life. Oh, that's such a horrible guess. I need to throw something random in there.
Horror and life.
And hot dogs. I'm going to predict hot dogs and see what happens.
Really?
Maybe.
Okay, now we need to keep hot dogs in mind and see it, like now
Who knows?
we just jinxed it. We have to now. Now our hands
We
are
have
tied.
to. Now, you
Yeah.
know, there's so many different kinds too. There's
Exactly.
vegan hot dogs,
Right?
there's meat hot dogs, there's like sweet
Yeah.
buns, normal rolls, and they're there. It's already in the conversation. So
This
look at us
exactly. We
go.
just wove it into the conversation very slyly. This is going to be quite interesting. Why don't I give you the just to before we get too much or too deep into whatever the hell we're going to talk about, I'm going to give you the quick intro blurb that I've almost learned by heart by now, but I'm still going to read off my other screen. So, this is the magic I'm
Consistency.
presenting to my
Like it.
viewers here. This is just smoke and mirrors. So, but also this is something for you, right? Just think of this podcast as a portrait, right? We're going to do a little mini memoir, if you will, to bring out your personality traits and to inspire new perspectives for our listeners. And in order to do that, what I want to go do with you today is go on a journey through your life, through times, through places, and philosophy. And this is intended as a dialogue. So don't view this as an interview where I ask questions and you give the answers, but feel free to bounce my questions back to me or just pose your own as this develops. And I'm sure that along the way, this is just going to be a smooth, naturally flowing conversation. There's always a couple of questions that I have prepared beforehand, and there's a few that I actually specifically prepared for this podcast, but we'll really just see where this goes and if we even get to look into or talk about any of those questions. What I want to start off with is something that I didn't do with my first two guests, but I find is interesting. So far, all the guests that I've had have been people that I already know, right? It's going to be a while, I think, if at all, that I'm going to start talking to like strangers or people that I've
Well, you
only
know
had
a lot
quick
of people,
acquaintances. Yes.
so
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's a certain there's an amount of people that I can burn through before it either starts repeating.
True. I love it.
Yeah, just
Suffer under my
one at a
podcast.
time. Next. But I want to go through how we met in the first place, because I think that's already interesting, right? This is
Oh my God. Yes, it's been a very long time.
right. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Like I think it goes back to 2007
9.
ish, 9. No, it
2007.
can't be 2009 because I was
No, you're right.
already
It was 2007.
7.
And it's because that was the year I finished my A levels in college,
Right.
and I had just started singing in a band.
That's correct.
And
Exactly.
and yeah, the band was like a bunch of friends that I had known during school, and it was something a little more experimental because everyone in the band was doing music elsewhere and something a little more conventional, whether it was like a conventional metal band or like a brass band or
Yeah.
a cover band. And we all kind of just wanted to make music, just whatever we felt like making, have it a little crazier and unique and kind of just do our thing. And
Didn't
about
you even
yeah.
back then, didn't you do EDM in there as well, or was that
That was
handmade
a
music?
separate project that
That
I
was a
had at
separate
the
one, yeah.
same time with a producer that I still work with on occasion.
Oh,
The
nice.
group is Electric Dance Theater, and
Yes.
and it's cool. When you're a creative, you've got lots of different pockets. It's not just like, oh, I want to make music that sounds like the Moody Blues, and so I'm only
Right.
going to listen to the Moody Blues because the Moody Blues probably listen to other music and not just their own. So I think when you're a creative, you kind of just do whatever you can, and especially when you're finding yourself stylistically. So the band at the time, I think we were already called Tuxedo Paint System, or later that was the name.
Yeah.
And I think the band still exists. It's like a fun band, again, with friends. I'm not in it anymore, but still in touch with most of the members loosely, but adult life. So the band had existed 3 months and had its first gig at some semi-local competition. And
Right.
and you
It
were
was
reporting
crazy.
on it because you worked
Exactly.
for a newspaper at the
I
time.
worked for the local newspaper there, and it was in this small town called Mammelstein, which nobody the hell knows, because it's a suburb of a small town called Königstein, which also nobody the hell knows. But that's around 20 kilometers from Frankfurt. So that you might have heard of. But yeah, I was working for the local newspaper. I still am occasionally, actually. It's been 20 years now that I've been working for them.
Cool.
And
Cool.
Yeah, and I was reporting on that. And this is already telling us a little facet of you as a person. You're an artist, clearly. You're a very creative person, and now for a few years you have been in the horror movie genre, and you're still staying true to what you do in terms of music. So these two
Although I
things we
still
can
need to
already
say
throw out there.
it's not just horror movies. I work
Yeah,
in the horror industry, and
horror
that
industry.
also includes literature, events,
Yeah,
music projects, films as well, video games, and all kinds of stuff, and a new project that I will plug later.
that's
But
right.
generally, the horror industry, so not focused on one particular medium per
Yeah,
se.
true, true. It's a very cool industry and it's a very cool genre. I've always felt like many of the most impressive movies I've seen, the movies that really stuck with me and that challenged me to think in different ways, were horror movies, you know. Um,
There's
there's a
reasons
lot
for
of
that as well.
yeah.
And I'll already talk about it if I may. I don't know if you have like a
Why don't
particular
yeah, I mean
structure
we
in
might as well
mind.
just jump right in and then we can always try to drift back to how
Go
we met
back.
because that's how we so or why don't we yeah, you know what? We'll stick there for a moment, how we met and then how things like how we became
We'll go back to
friends.
horror later.
And
We'll
then we'll
get
go
there.
we'll dive right into we'll dive straight into horror and then go into that. But
Because the
let's
story
hold that
does
thought.
continues in terms of how we met,
Yeah.
because it was a nice encounter. The
Yeah, we
chemistry
got
was
along
good. You
well.
were
Yeah.
very professional and very nice. And the article was written really well. It wasn't like a standard thing. I could really tell by the way you wrote the article that you were taking your time to listen to everyone's music, to get to know the people who were there, even though all these people, I mean, it was a competition. No one was doing it seriously. Everyone was doing it for fun. A lot of these
Yeah.
bands were very young at the time, and you still treated it with the same respect you would have treated an article about someone who was more established. And a few years later, and I can't tell you that year anymore, but
It
I
must have
was
been
trying to
2009 or something.
that yeah, it might have been around that. And I was trying to pull all my contacts in and see who do I know and how can I kind of just coordinate all these people I've met the last few years. And then I thought, you know what, that article was really nice and that guy was really nice. And I ended because that's the weird producer stalker in me. I mean, depending on context, I guess.
Yeah.
But I ended up contacting the newspaper and I said, I have this article from a few years ago and I don't know who wrote it. And these are the initials. And who is this person? And they said, well, we usually don't give out that information. Like, what do
I didn't
you
even know
want?
that.
And I said, oh no, I work in the entertainment industry and I just love the way it was written and I kind of just want to connect. And they said, well, we can't give you any contact information, but knowing him and knowing how you met and who you are, this is his name. Do with it as you like. And I was like, okay. And then I ended up, finding you
Oh,
on the
that's so
golden
cool.
networking platform. I just, found you on Facebook
Right. Yeah.
and I said, hey, are you that Matt Eastwood? Are you that guy who wrote that article? And you're like, yeah, who are you? What are you doing here? Because at that point you weren't working there
That's
anymore.
right.
And it turned out you were in Canada.
Exactly.
So yeah,
Oh,
long
so
story
crazy.
short,
Yeah.
we connected a few
And that's
years
how we
later,
reconnected. And then whenever I visited Germany, we just went for a drink.
hung out.
We
Yeah,
had these really
talked
good conversations for like 3 hours on end or something. Like pretty much what we're going to do today.
minimum. And
Yeah.
just about not even knowing what we were going to do. It was always,
Yeah.
let's meet for
Just
coffee. And
yeah.
then it just, became this never ending conversation that eventually we had to stop because we had other appointments.
Yeah. That's
But
true.
yeah, every time you came to town and you visited, it was like, all right, hit me up. Let's do something.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, knowing that we can have these kinds of conversations, that was one of the main reasons I wanted to have a podcast with you. I believe that, or my experience has shown me that, if you sit down long enough with a person, you can have these really cool conversations, uh, no matter who it is. But of course, for me, it's easier to start off or do these podcasts with people with whom I already know these conversations are going to happen and going to flow very nicely. Um, And for us too, of course, this is the perfect opportunity to catch up because I think it's also been a year or something, that we've even,
I
or
mean,
maybe
yeah,
longer
the
than that.
golden 2020
Yeah,
experience.
I know.
It's a great thing because you
Oh
you look
God.
at the things that you have and you just
Yeah,
appreciate them a little more. It's a gift, really. I
yeah,
mean,
you
if you
do.
lose someone dear to you and didn't go into financial bankruptcy, there's a way to spin it.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, it's true. And it's funny, with Melina, the last guest, who's also a musician, I actually talked about how like you need to go out and just approach people, just talk to people and just make connections. You need to make that happen because otherwise you're missing out on an incredibly central and important part of your life that you could be having, right? And that's what you did. You were like, I'm gonna dig this guy up and then I'm gonna, talk to him. And now we're friends, and that's such a good thing to do for yourself and for other
As
people
well,
as well, because you're
when you
enriching
meet someone,
everybody's life.
well, I mean, it's a two-way street. And
Yeah,
sometimes you meet someone and you just, click. You meet people who are just either super fascinating or the chemistry's right. And if you look at it, why waste your time and wait for something to happen like, oh, well, if we are doing this together coincidentally, or if I've waited this number of days, or whatever, what is the convention in this situation? And I find at least the people that I click with, um, if you just say, hey, I like you, you like me, this is a cool conversation, no ulterior motives, except for just, to stay in touch because who knows? Sometimes you have those short windows of chance and it's a great moment you share with a stranger and then it fleets and that's fine.
yeah.
But sometimes, why wait for something to happen? Just become acquaintances, become friends. It's
Just
not
become a
pushed. It's not,
catalyst.
yeah, it's not about going to conventions and trying to push your way into professionals who might become clients or hire you or whatever direction that's going. It's about, we were in this situation together, we vibed, we have something in common, or we don't have anything in common, but we like each other just as human beings.
Yeah,
Just take advantage of that. Don't wait for anything. And every encounter stays special. It's always very unique. But there are people that I honestly only see once every few years. But when we see each other, it's like, man, it's good to see you again. It's good to
yeah,
hear how things are going, and what a cool conversation and exchange of thoughts and minds.
yeah. That's
So
right. Exactly. Absolutely.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and that's I don't have anything to add really. I'm not gonna follow up with some empty bullshit.
Gosh, you are totally
This is
wrong. Get
Yeah,
out of my podcast. You
exactly.
suck.
Let's just finish this right here. It's
You're
just
gonna try. Give me a good run. We're no longer friends. It is over.
that's
Okay.
it. That's it. But no, I mean, yeah, I mean, you said it pretty well, and you summarize what I'm thinking on that subject as well. And so yeah, ever since then, like whenever we had the chance, we hung out, and obviously, I'm waiting for the day when there's no more Corona, or at least the restrictions are going to be loosened again a little, so I can record my first podcast live with the person in the same room. Um, but yeah, that's not yet happening. That's gonna be really cool because one of the things I want to get out of this podcast is that I wanna have excuses to travel more, to just get in my car or get on a train and go meet the person that I'm gonna talk to in person and then do that podcast live in their living room or in a cafe or something like that.
Cool.
So we'll see where that journey takes me.
There has to be a part two
Or
to this
takes us.
interview then at some point.
Absolutely. We can just follow up and just come up with different
Ah,
subjects. That's the other thing, like a human life is pretty long and there's a lot of things you can talk about that people have experienced and then they've had happen to them. Um, and that there's always subjects this it's you're going to spend a lot of time until you run out of subjects if you really want to push it. Um, we could now, why don't we get into the horror genre? We were talking about that a little earlier. You were starting to make a point. I cut it off and now I forgot what it was.
the point. and you will never hear it again because you lost that
Okay,
opportunity.
that's it.
No, it was about why some of the most I think what did you say, clever, intelligent, interesting
Yes.
films are horror films. Okay, so let me just open up the horror segment by saying I love horror, I live horror, and maybe talk about how I got to horror in the first place. Because although as a child I was super into creepy stuff, like creepy stories, more of the supernatural and unexplainable kind. I think a lot of young people are. I completely avoided horror films until I was 17.
Okay.
And the reason for that being, I get occasional sleep paralysis episodes. And so although I'm a lucid dreamer and I'm and I'm in control of my dream and always aware that I'm dreaming when I dream, sleep paralysis is a different story, because even if you don't even if there's nothing, even if nothing scary appears, if you open your eyes and someone's standing in your room in the middle of the night, you're going to freak out. And that would be a tamer version. It started when I was 13, and a lot of these episodes were
Wait,
terrifying. But
so you open your
yes.
eyes. So sleep paralysis means you're like you open your eyes and then you're still dreaming, or like
So yeah, so there are different forms of it. Basically, when we are sleeping, we are paralyzed,
right.
because it would hurt us if we started flailing in our sleep all the time.
Mm,
It makes sense biologically. But the REM phase, when we're going through that rapid eye movement and we're dreaming, what happens during sleep paralysis is that you sort of wake up, but the REM continues. And for a lot of people, it's visual. I think that is, what's the main issue. But for some people, it's auditory, and for very few people, it's touch as well. So you are awake and you are aware of your surroundings, but your brain keeps dreaming.
oh, fuck.
And
Okay,
with
yeah.
me, and to be fair, I'm not 100% sure if what I have is sleep paralysis, because when it happens, I'm not paralyzed, but I wake up and I'm in whatever space I'm in, and then there's something going on. And sometimes the imagery is quite normal, but sometimes mine were super terrifying. I think for most people, it's generally a terrifying experience, but depending on what you see, can be more or less terrifying.
Mm.
And
Can
yeah,
you?
but that's a thing in itself. I was gonna say, if you get to this point where you conclude, if my brain can conjure up this kind of thing, then a medium, a film that is meant to scare me, is probably going to be a million times
Yeah.
worse. And when I then saw my first real horror film, because I finally mustered up the strength, it was The Grudge, and I realized, as scary as it was, I appreciated it as an art form, and it was nothing compared to my sleep paralysis. It was actually not that bad. And I thought, well, this was fine.
Because I'm guessing it's not as visceral, right? I mean, it's a screen and you're sitting in front of it.
Yeah, and even with the screen, if you compare film to video games, for
Right.
example, like I
That's a
can
much more
binge
interactive medium.
watch, yeah, I can binge watch films, but you make me play Outlast. Like I still don't understand how I played part one, but like part two, I couldn't, because it physically stressed me out
Hmm.
so much. So, but
But
I'll
part
give
two
the
wasn't as good
controller.
either.
It had a different
Yeah.
goal, I think, in mind. It was even more of the shock value and less of the naked twins with penis and Sackett, which I
Oh, those
missed.
guys,
More of
man.
those guys. Oh my god!
Yeah.
But no, it was. I can watch someone play it again the moment that it's physical and I have to be responsible for my own fate. That's when I start getting scared, because I don't trust I can take that
Right.
responsibility. But the thing is, with sleep paralysis, it usually, I can't even tell you how long it lasts. I mean, sometimes it's longer, but it's probably in most cases just a few seconds, and it feels like forever. And those few seconds are just enough to scare you silly. But so that was
I
why I
can
didn't get
imagine.
into it for a
Yeah.
really long time.
When you mentioned that phenomenon, a couple of things popped into my mind, a couple of questions, or also an association. Um, I it reminded me of, but I think that's something different in its nature, but it reminded me of that character from The Haunting of Hill House,
Hmm.
like the girl who wakes up and who's
Keep seeing the
frozen
bent
to the
neck
bed.
lady.
Yeah, she sees the bent neck lady, but also she wakes up and she's frozen in her bed, right? She can't move, and then
So what they're
her
showing,
husband helps her.
yeah, what they're showing in that is basically a variation of what sleep paralysis looks like. I
Okay,
mean, in that they're fictionally saying the ghosts are real, and
yeah,
trust there are people out there who say what you're seeing. There are documentaries and there are Reddit conversations and there are articles, and some people do believe there's a supernatural component to it, especially because if you really study sleep paralysis, I mean, it goes back to the old hag where you have like an elderly woman or like a demon kind of thing that like sits on your chest and stops you from
right,
breathing.
yeah,
And a lot of people see, and this is in a dig in your direction, but a guy with a hat that seems to be
it's
a
what it is.
reoccurring character. It is what it is.
Yeah,
So a lot of people who have nothing to do with each other have reported very similar characters appearing in their episodes. So some people out there are convinced that there is a supernatural component to it.
gotcha.
But as much as I am drawn to the theme of all that supernatural, unless I have hardcore evidence
Right.
this is a real person, it's all a figment of my imagination. And I think the more you dig into the science, the more terrifying it gets, because you realize it's your own body creating these things, as opposed to, some ghost that just popped in and can't touch you because it's just a ghost.
Yeah. I've always wondered about that. If you know somebody or if you listen to somebody talking about these kinds of experiences, right, where they say, because there's enough people in the world who say, no, that's like you said, that there has to be something supernatural going on here. I have some sort of sixth sense or something that allows me to communicate with beings from the other side of the veil, and I'm always like, first of all, who am I to say that's not true? Because just because I don't experience it, doesn't mean it's not true. Also, I think if the person experiences it, that makes it true for them, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And of
Well,
course, so I'm not gonna like I think that they believe it's true. I believe that,
so
and I can't judge
um
any further.
I don't judge, but I do freaking love real life spooky stories.
Oh
And
yeah. Oh yeah.
there are some videos that I put together as a compilation on the YouTube channel for GRIMMFEST TV,
Hmm.
and the compilation videos, and maybe you can like edit it in GRIMMFEST TV YouTube channel. I don't know, just put it
Right.
on my feed. But to promote the release of our format that went on yesterday, and I will promote later, I put together compilation videos of people I had been interviewing for our format. And it was all, I added these questions to the end of our interviews, and I asked them to tell me real life spooky stories, things that either they had personally experienced or a friend of theirs experienced.
Hmm.
And I've got stories of my own. I put one in the compilation because I assume this is going to be an annual Halloween special. But one of the filmmakers, Pete Tompkins, he was telling a story, and I hope your listeners love this because I'm all about these stories. But he was telling a story, and it's in the compilation video, of how when he was a kid, he was sitting in a car and it was a road trip with his family, and they had just visited their his grandmother, and in front of them was a bus full of people. And he looked to the side when he was in the car, and he saw a cemetery, and when he looked at the cemetery, he saw a woman in white just floating over the cemetery. And whilst he was watching this as a child, he asked everyone in the car, do you guys see this? Like, look at the woman. It looks like she's floating. It's so weird. And no one in the car saw what he saw. It was only
Shit.
him. And then 2 weeks later, he got or his family got a letter, an envelope from his grandmother, and she had cut something out of the newspaper. And what happened was a woman on the bus saw the exact same thing,
No
but
way.
no one else on the bus saw it. So she wrote an article to the newspaper and asked if anyone else had seen what she saw, because she thought she was going nuts. And the grandmother saw it, knowing what the grandson had seen in the car, cut out the newspaper clipping and sent it to them.
Holy shit.
So two people who had no contact to each other simultaneously saw this woman floating over the cemetery.
I'm guessing he still has that article, right?
I have no idea. He was really tiny, and yeah,
right.
he's a collector. He might have it. He might still have the newspaper clipping, but it's one of those things where, and I absolutely believe that this happened. Now, does that mean it's a ghost with awareness and consciousness and yada yada, or is it like the echo of someone's energy, or what is the theory you believe in? But the fact of the matter is, that is what one would classify as a ghost, and two people who had zero contact to each other saw the same thing, whilst their environments didn't, and it went into a newspaper and was cut out as a clipping to like keep the memory. And it was like, what the hell,
man? That's crazy.
Wow.
Know.
So when you've heard like tons of stories like that, you're like, okay, well, there's something, you know, I don't know if supernatural is even the term. Yeah, it's natural. And then it technically, even if it was science, it's supernatural. So I guess something's going on. But do I think that a ghost is going to try to like possess me or whatever? I don't know. But I do love these stories. And I do believe that a lot of people who tell them, they did genuinely experience it the way they did. And
that's exactly it. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well.
Videos if you want more ghost stories.
I find it super fascinating that you are interviewing people for your program and that you're asking them that question, because these are really interesting stories to collect, and I believe a lot of people have them. I have one actually myself.
Do share. I want to hear it.
Yeah.
Now that you brought it up.
It's not that supernatural, but I did write it down right after, like the same day I wrote it. I think I have it on my computer somewhere. And let me see how much of it I remember, because if I read my notes now, I would probably remember more. But it was sort of, I was waking up in the morning and I was lying in bed and I was awake and I was completely like lucid, but I felt like for a while there, for just a few minutes, it felt like my mind was sharper and more awake than normal. Like there was some extended clarity to my mind. And I was closing my eyes and I was imagining being on a bicycle and riding down a cobblestone street in my hometown. And my entire body felt the whole experience, like the feeling of being on the bicycle and like the vibrations from the cobblestones. And then out of left field came my dad's voice. And I don't remember if he was saying something coherent or if it was just words. I'm not sure, but I heard it so clearly. Like it was just like I was surrounded by it. Like it was just there, and it was like ultra high res.
Well, that sounds like a lucid dream.
It's sort of, in a way, but
it's when you're aware that you're dreaming and it becomes so real that it's like it's actually happening.
Super real. Yeah, that is like,
you know that you're in that situation. That's a lucid dream.
I guess then that's what it was. It could have been that. It did feel like more real than reality in a way. Like there was some sort of elevated reality kind of thing to it. Even though I knew I was aware that it wasn't real in that way, you know, it wasn't, I was lying in my bed, it was in Montreal, but it was just like the kind of the experience, the auditory experience, the sensory experience was sort of amplified. It wasn't just real, but it was amplified real.
Amplified, yeah. Because and again, I'm a lucid dreamer, so like sleep paralysis aside, I've been a lucid dreamer for several years now, and there was an incident that kind of like triggered. I've always been fascinated by dreams, but you know, there was a point where it just went click, and I suddenly understood what it felt like to be in a dream and I can't turn it off. And what happens is you're going through these dreams knowing that you're dreaming, and everything is amplified because it's all internal, it's all in your mind. So if you know what a voice is supposed to sound like, you might hear it extremely presently and
Yes.
extremely
Yeah.
clearly
Yeah, exactly.
because it's not being influenced by external elements. It's really
Right.
just your mind giving it to you, and it's a very vivid experience. And it's why, for example, I remember my dreams so well because the experience has become such a loud and colorful one that, you know, in the mornings or the first half of the day or that day, depending on how interesting it is, I could recall it like I just watched a film, which
Mm.
is always weird to my friends because especially if someone I know has been in a dream, then I tell them all about it. And there are these random details. They're like, why would you even remember that? Like, well, that's the cereal you ate. It was important. I don't know why. But it's really fascinating. I think I had eventually, once I got the hang of it, you know, I had the bad habit of trying to and this sounds so horrible and so pretentious and so dumb, but I tried to work in my dreams as well, because working on like concepts and ideas was super easy in a dream because once you had a question
Yeah.
or something you wanted to do, you could visualize it in a dream. Like if I wanted to see, hey, well, what would this look like or how would this play out? I could literally play it out in my dream
Right.
because I had that kind of
Right.
control. And it was still my mind doing it. It's kind of like if you were to sit there and think about it, but in a dream, it's visual and it's an experience.
That's
And
right.
then I would like wake up like half asleep, like that's great. And then I'd write it down in a
Write it down
notebook and then go
immediately.
back to
Yeah.
sleep. So I wouldn't forget it if I slept another 3 hours and then it just wasn't present anymore.
Yeah.
But I've stopped doing that because I need to work less. But
Not
still,
not just
sometimes
without
creative
work during your
ideas.
dreams.
It's
But it's
like,
true. I mean, like also while you dream, your brain works in different ways, right? Like it's
yeah,
thinking way outside the box, and
totally outside the
it's
box. It's
firing on
insane.
all cylinders, and you get ideas that you wouldn't necessarily get during waking hours, right? So
Totally.
it's certainly a resource that you can tap into, and I believe it was Mick Jones from Foreigner. But this is, I think I heard that on the radio, somebody mentioning it. So it might be bullshit. But I think he heard the whole song, I Want to Know What Love Is, in a dream. And then he woke up, he wrote it down, and boom, hit. So,
And it's weird
so,
because a lot of people claim you can't hear music in dreams, which
oh,
is
I
all
certainly can.
bullshit
Yeah.
because people who do a lot of deal with music a lot, you dream music too.
Yeah.
So I totally believe that. I mean, whether it's true or not, I'm just going to pretend that story was true because it sounds very believable
Yeah.
to me.
I've had dreams where there were entire pop songs playing that don't exist, like don't exist in real life. Like there was no, it was just a full on song playing in my head.
Were they at
And
least
it had
good? Because
everything.
like
That
being
I
trapped in
like
a
them.
dream with a bad pop song is like the
That would
worst.
blow. No, I like
If
them.
I hear Call Me Maybe one more time, like
Yeah, I
it's a
know.
great song, but if I hear it one more time,
Or if you hear something in your dream that's derived from it.
yeah.
Yeah. No, no, they were decent songs, like pop rock type of music. Yeah, and I woke up and they're not songs that exist in real life. But now they're gone. Like I didn't, like I'm also not, I'm not good at writing stuff. I don't know how to write down music, like sheet music.
Well, you
I'm
should
not
have
good
like
at
an
that.
audio recorder on your phone next time it happens, then just sing it
And then
like,
try sing it.
"When
Yeah.
we've got a garden together," and then just record it in like
Yeah,
sleeping
true.
drunken state, and then give it to a musician to turn it into
Here you
something and,
go.
and
Yeah,
collect the
that's true.
royalties. That'd be cool. And then they'll like someone will be super famous bringing out your music, and they're like, "Well, what's your secret?" "I can't tell. It's a secret." And then it turns out that all their big hits were songs that you dreamt of,
Exactly.
and then sent to them. That would make a fantastic
That
horror
would
film.
be
And I need
great.
to put a pin in that idea.
Yeah. Um,
So
so there's a couple questions I took note of while we were talking. You see, the first horror movie you saw was The Grudge. So like the
yeah,
2005 American version?
no, the
The
Japanese one.
original. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Yeah. I was just
Yeah.
curious about that. So,
And I think the second one I saw was the original Exorcist, and the third one I saw was Saw.
oh my
The
God.
third one I saw
Yeah.
was Saw, and those were the first three real horror films that I
Mm,
sought out. I think looking back, a lot of the stuff I saw as a child would be considered horror formats, but you don't accept it as such at the time because it doesn't make you feel the same way, I
mm-hmm,
guess.
mm-hmm.
But even a lot of the stuff that were produced for kids when we were kids,
Oh yeah,
and
like
before our
The
time,
Grimm fairy tales, for instance.
like,
They are
yeah,
grim.
they are indeed very dark and twisted, and
Yeah,
yeah, there are different versions of it. But even in film, like you look at Labyrinth or
yeah.
Nightmare Before Christmas, and you can't tell if that's not
That's creepy
horror.
fucking stuff. And I watched
Yeah.
Coraline or Coraline.
Oh, Coraline, yeah, yeah.
Beautiful, really, really great movie. But yeah, that's pretty dark and twisted,
So I
you
used
know?
to teach and like vocal coaching and that kind of thing, like posture and stuff. With I worked with kids and teenagers for several years, and I used to ask them just out of curiosity because even though I wasn't working in the horror industry then, obviously the interest was still there in horror. And they used to ask them, "Did you ever see a film that kind of scarred you?" Because I was a great teacher like that. And they they said one of the films that I heard a lot was Coraline,
Oh yeah.
because the age restriction was actually quite low. You could see it at a very young age
Yeah.
in most countries. And the fact of the matter is that film is freaking terrifying. I mean, no, there's no blood,
Terrified me
but
as an
there's
adult. I was
as
30,
an
35
yeah,
or something when I watched
I
it.
mean, button eyes, ghost children who can't even remember their lives because they've been dead for so long.
Yeah.
A kid called YB because it stands for why born, because he was an oops baby. It's like, what kind of a what? And it's a
Yeah.
great film, but I
It
can't
is.
believe they weren't stricter with the age restriction. It was almost like no one actually watched it. They kind of just
Right?
flew through the script and said, okay, no blood, it's okay, send
Yeah.
it to the children. Like, no, don't send it to the children. Babies are made of spiders. They are gorgeous
It's true.
creatures. Why
It's
do
true.
that? So
But
anyway,
damn good movie. I remember the ending was sort of like it took us a bit of a nosedive towards the end because I think I don't remember. But I thought like the whole the setup, the payoff wasn't as good as the setup, but still very good movie.
it's really hard though when you set it up
Yeah.
right to get that right. And I will say that that's where it kind of mm, turned into a kids film again, because the end was like a classic
It wrapped
battle,
it up
if you
pretty
will.
neatly. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was that's bless you.
Thanks.
That's what made it more of a kids film again. I think the rest of it was you could easily just change the ending and it would be a purely adult suitable film.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Um, so when you talked about sleep paralysis, that's another question I wrote down.
Mhm.
Um, tell me about one of your experiences. Like just
Okay,
walk me
so
through it.
oh my god, so many. So I guess do you do you want to hear a scarier one or a weirder one?
Scary.
Okay, scary. So I guess I'll just start with the first one then.
Okay.
The first sleep paralysis episode I ever had. And everyone's going to leave this and go, Mariam's a freak. But yes, I am. And I'm warning you now. So turn
Okay.
it off if you don't want to hear weird sleep
Exactly.
paralysis stories. So when I was 13, 13, I was sleeping. Actually, I was 14. That started at 14. So I was sleeping in bed, and next to my bed was a light, like a big light that could light the whole room right next to the bed, right at me the window, and towards the side of the lamp was the rest of the room. It was at the wall. So in the middle of the night, I suddenly feel how someone grabs onto my ankle, like I physically feel it, and I was startled to say the least. And when you have a bad dream, the first thing you do is you turn on the light, because if you were sleeping, it goes away when the light's on because
Yeah.
you wake up. So I turned on the light. So at this point, my room was completely lit. Um, but I didn't wake up. And when I looked down towards the end of my bed, I saw a person, a male person,
Holy
and
shit.
the bottom half of his body was under my bed, and his torso was very unnaturally, it's going to get graphic, kids,
Contorted. Yeah.
twisted,
Right.
and he was leaning on the edge of my bed and holding my ankle, but he looked like a water corpse, so he was
Oh my
slightly
God.
bloated,
Yeah.
and all the soft bits of his body looked like they had been nibbled off or something, like the eyelids and the lips and stuff like that.
That is
So I saw that
exactly
and it
shit.
freaked out.
Of course.
And what happened was, I was so, because the thing is, I could also, in addition to seeing and feeling it, I could hear like he was trying to breathe and it was gargling. And obviously you crap bricks, to say the least.
Of
I
course.
mean, I did physically, but I shut my eyes
Yeah.
and I just told myself over and over again, like hyperventilating, it can't be real. It's impossible. It's impossible that this is real. Because even in that moment, even after having physically experienced it, there's no way that that was actually happening.
Mm.
So I was lying there with my eyes just closed. And I can't tell you if I was lying there for 30 seconds or 30 minutes, but I kept repeating in my head that it couldn't be real. And then eventually, I mustered up whatever courage I had. I opened my eyes and there was nothing there.
Yeah.
But for that moment, I felt absolutely terrified. I don't think I had ever been that scared in my life in that moment.
Yeah.
But obviously, it's my mind. It's not real.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, as a little
Yeah.
kid, what do you remember how old you were at that?
14. I was 14.
14. Yeah.
So I was old enough to know better.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
remember being a kid. I must have been like 10, perhaps 9, something like that. I remember on several occasions that I woke up and like I had like nightmares, and then I woke up and it was the middle of the night, and then for a while I was unable to move. Like I was frozen in my bed and I couldn't move.
that's sleep paralysis.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
I woke
'cause
up from the nightmare and I was awake and there was no more, the nightmare was gone. But I was so freaked out by it that my
Well, if you
whole body
physically
was,
couldn't move, then
yeah,
you were probably still paralyzed. And what happens,
right.
even if you don't see something in that situation, is it kind of enhances the fear because you don't understand why you can't move your body. And
Yeah,
so you start making connections as to why it is, but it can be chemical in that moment. But it's scary nonetheless.
it
Um,
is,
and it can
certainly.
also be connected to the fact that you were so petrified from that horrible nightmare
Right.
that your body refused to actually do anything normal in that moment. It's like, okay, don't move, just keep doing what you were doing and forget the nightmare. It's like, no, it's not good enough. Why are you doing this to
Yeah, that's
me?
true.
Brain.
That is true. But
Yeah.
for me, that went away with over time, it went away. Like that happened, I would say the last time it happened, I must have been 11 or something, and then never again.
Scary though.
It is scary though, and I'm pretty sure every kid experiences that, right? Like, especially as a kid, because you're vulnerable, like you grow up, you become an adult, and the way you experience the world changes, right? Because you start realizing, well, I'm strong now, I can defend myself, if push comes to shove, and the situations in which we feel overpowered and defenseless, they're virtually eradicated, right? Because we're also normally not exposed to natural disasters and shit like that. So, but sometimes I think it's worth remembering what that feels like, because there are people in the world who, even as grown-ups, are physically not as strong as other people, and it's like if you try to remember that, you can gain more empathy for what another person might be experiencing, just because you yourself are now strong and and able to defend yourself. Somebody else might not be.
Absolutely. And I think generally with dreams, I mean, there are a lot of theories why we have them in the first place, but in any case, it's a practice run.
Yeah, it
It
is.
tries
Yeah.
to, what happens is, whether that's the intention or not, if you can speak of intention when it comes to biology, is that,
Or the point, I
you
guess.
go
Yeah.
through situations and you expose yourself to emotions, or you learn to just react and deal, because a lot of what we do in situations that push us to our limits, whether it's fear or sadness, anything that pushes us to our limits, it becomes an instinctive reaction. If you're standing next to your child, for example, and then suddenly some sort of danger or threat, like a car or something, comes, you're not going to think, oh, it probably makes sense for me to shield my child or pull it away. What you're going to do is you're going to jump, and just whatever your body does in that moment, stand in front of the kid, pull it away, or shove the kid in danger's way, whatever that instinct is. That is how you react. And those are things that, in what other situations can we practice them without real life consequences?
Yes.
If not in our dreams, or if you go like into martial arts and practice reflexes there. So yeah, there is, whether that's supposed to happen or not, there are positive consequences to how we handle things subconsciously in
Totally.
our dreams.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the brain prepares for extreme situations, so you're at least a little better equipped if they roll around.
Absolutely.
Yep,
Yeah.
true. Then what we're going to do at this point, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll just be back in a few minutes, or just
Cool.
for you, I guess, a few seconds. So long. Ta-da! We're back.
So
Hello.
before we continue, I want to show off with my fantastic Halloween mug. I don't
Sweet.
know the company that produces it or anything about it. I think it was limited edition from, like, I don't know, 20 years ago, but my pride and joy, and it's what I use all year round, regardless of the season.
Hell yeah. Well, Halloween, at this point, it's like mid-November, so Halloween is only 2 weeks ago.
Halloween is every day. I don't know what you're talking about.
True.
And what's
that.
funny is that even holidays like Christmas, in the olden days, I can't tell you what that means, but back in the day, Christmas was all about telling ghost stories. So Christmas used to be a spooky holiday. I mean, look at Scrooge. He was visited by 3 ghosts. So where people are like, what? Halloween, my lover? What's wrong with you? I'm like, no, we are not friends now.
Right. Yeah. Well, we talked about lucid dreaming and sleep paralysis. So, this podcast is going great so far.
The alternative to hot dogs.
Perfect. So, let's just take a complete left turn and talk about the horror genre.
Complete left.
Totally different.
So different.
Just now for something completely different.
Because you're either interested in supernatural stuff or you're interested in horror.
Exactly.
Obviously.
Yeah.
It's horror. Let's talk horror.
It only, I'd already known you for a few years. Or let's say it has been a few years after I met you that I realized, or I guess that perhaps even that you went into the horror genre like you did. Or you got involved with it in the way that you are now, or the industry. Let's say the industry, because at first I met you, the first few times I met you, in my mind you were a musician, and then at some point I realized that you went into horror. How did that come about?
Fantastic question. So as we have already established, I have always been interested in the macabre and creepy things that the universe gives us. But I, as many people in the entertainment business do, I quit law school to work in entertainment, and it wasn't horror at first. I started out as a ghostwriter, and I would write in like the electro and electro pop scene, lyrics and basic compositions that were then picked up by other producers, and it was for people that labels in other countries had. And yeah, so I wrote music, and that was what I did. I also did hosting gigs, and generally you become like a jack of all trades. I still, performed occasionally as a singer and stuff, but it was very music centric, vocal centric, presentation centric, if you will.
Can you put a label on that as to which years that was? 20 what?
Yes.
2012, 13?
So it would have been 2010, 2011, around that time. Yeah, so that's or maybe 2012, actually. 2011, 2012, around that time.
It might have been around that time that you also told me. I remember one time we sat down in Frankfurt. We went for a coffee, and you told me that you were turning your networking skills and just the fact that you were very, very well connected in different industry sectors. You just knew so many people. For a while there, you were a connector. You were professionally connecting people with each other. So, establishing relationships.
Yes. So when I decided to be self-employed and work in the entertainment industry, I didn't want to just be in a cover band and sing. That, I mean, that's a fantastic profession, and people do it well, and I love going to events with great cover bands, but it wasn't. I had a really tough time finding my place professionally. I knew what I was capable of, and I knew I had to be smart about things, but I didn't quite yet know where my place in the world was at the time. And I mean, we constantly change and we constantly grow, but eventually, if you reflect on it enough, you at least get to a place where it feels like this is the right direction. So when I decided to be self-employed, I was already with these ghostwriting gigs. I was already making money when I was a student. And I realized, although my entire life I was like, the entertainment industry is for dreamers, I'm never going to do that, haha. Eventually I got to the point where I was like, okay, well, this is a career, and I actually have skills that would make me quite good at working in this area. But what I did was I started I needed a plan, because at first I only gave myself 12 months. And I said, you can either live off of what you do in a year, or you can't. And then you have to go back to school and just, as the Germans say, bite in the sour apple. Yeah. So what I did was in the first 1-2 months, I started going to a whole bunch of events, conventions, seminars around the music industry in particular.
And this was all in the Frankfurt area, right?
No, I went to Berlin, for example.
Like across
Germany. Big one. Yeah. So I was bouncing all over the place, and while a lot of other musicians and artists and singers who were also attending the events, they were kind of going towards the workshops. But I wasn't interested in that. They were kind of going there in the hopes that someone who worked in the industry would discover them, I guess, or recognize their talent, or record something cool off of them, and then whatever would happen. And I was very much not interested in that. I went to all the business seminars. I was like taking notes, like, okay, branding, what is management and structure and fiscal responsibility, tax breaks, funding bodies. Okay, what is all this? And I was like taking notes, and just trying to figure out how does this industry work.
Let me quickly jump in. There's clicking noises, and I'm pretty sure they're because your microphone is hitting your necklace.
Oh,
I'm thinking that's probably what's happening.
I'll take off my microphone if you want.
The microphone. Yeah, let's just get rid of the microphone, solve the problem that way.
And it will be sign language that exactly. I do not know how to do. Let's go for it. Just read my face, like a lot of passive aggressive.
Exactly.
Okay, so the necklace is gone.
Okay.
Yeah. So I went to all the business seminars, and I was taking all the notes that I could to just figure out how the industry worked and where I could find my place. And that really helped because it gave me more structure. It gave me a more realistic picture of how things are. There was some really inspiring monologues and speeches, in particular stuff like, if you want to make music for fun, just to be an artist, that's great, but then it's not a career. You're really just an artist. But there's no shame in turning something creative into a career. It does mean that you have to change your approach, and you can't just sit on a field with a guitar around people who dig your music and think that you can live off of that. It's absolutely fine and legitimate, but be aware that that's not a career. The approach has to be a different one. And hearing a lot of people who showed respect for creative skills and simultaneously were clever about how to go about things, that was really important to me, because up to that point, a lot of the people I had in my immediate environment, you were either a creative and the world just didn't get you, or you were a business person and a sellout. And I didn't have enough input from people who were like, you can be both. You can be creative and you can make money off of it, and that's okay. Just be a decent person. You could, and it was really interesting because a lot of times you hear that the entertainment industry is vicious and ugly and horrible, and don't get me wrong, a lot of it is, but I didn't want to be like that. And that's something I said from day one of being self-employed. Like, I want to make it in a business that's considered a Shark Tank, but I refused to bend to those principles and get success off of that. I want to do my thing. I want to be a decent person. I want to work with other decent people. And if we're successful with that concept, then we can live by example and be like, hey, you can be okay and weird and unique and still make it. And it, still took years of navigating around people who were very much convinced that I'm going to call it the outdated mindset of the entertainment industry, were convinced that that was still alive and well, and that was the future. And although it was still present, it wasn't the future. And when you meet people, I'm someone who very much respects experience and people who have been at it for a really long time. But the ugly truth was that a lot of people who were established, regardless of what projects they had worked on and what names they were associated with, they weren't people I wanted to be affiliated with or wanted to be around. And it took me years and years and years to completely break free from that in actuality. But in my mind, I never wanted to be a part of it. Only I was like in my early mid-20s at the time. And even though that sounds very old for the entertainment industry, I was still young and inexperienced. And I didn't want to be arrogant and go in thinking I knew it all. I had to look up to people. I had to find people who knew what they were talking about to learn. And really only after playing this spiel for like years and years was I able to say, okay, well, I'm starting to maybe understand how things work around here, but I have the confidence I have the smarts to identify what is not okay, and I have the confidence to turn it down, even if someone's trying to package it as an opportunity. But yeah, going back to what you were saying about the networking, once I started being more savvy as a business person in the entertainment industry, I simultaneously learned how to be more savvy as a business person. And in addition to building a career as someone in the arts and entertainment, what I also started doing was connecting people from different industries, because I talk to anyone. I don't care if you do what I do or not, regardless of your income, regardless of your culture, regardless of of your career path, what your interests. If you're a decent human being, let's have a conversation.
Yeah.
And I started realizing that it was difficult for people to meet people outside of their networks. And it was often the missing piece to a really great project or a really great idea or a really great setup. So I just started introducing people and simultaneously saying, okay, well, I introduced you. If this thing works out, give me a tiny percentage for the first, 1 to 3 years. And it was only like little amounts here and there, but it first of all helped me practice that introduction of minds to each other. But simultaneously, I started getting involved in so many really different projects because I was somehow a linking component to them.
Yeah.
And it showed me so much about how various industries work.
It's
And
crazy how that
how
expands your
entrepreneurship,
horizons.
it totally
Yeah,
does.
it's
And
insane.
now I'm working as a producer. So my job is to bring people together and make projects become reality.
Yeah.
But I didn't know at the time that that's what I was going to end up doing. It was kind of just a hustle. It made sense and it paid the bills whilst I was still working in the entertainment industry. And it really shaped how I go about things professionally, even though, that wasn't the end game. It just was a step in the process.
So that part of it, or that period in your life, I can relate to that because when I moved to Montreal, I just hardcore dove into these different. Well, I was also very interested in the entertainment industry, and I specifically looked for people who were doing independent filmmaking, and also the theater scene. So I just jumped right into that, and then I went to networking events, I went to meetups, and also I just used Craigslist to find as many like independent filmmakers as I could to just do set photography for them and just tag along, really, just hang around the set and just talk to people and just be involved and just see this and experience this. I wanted to see how this whole scene, this whole niche, how it lives, and through that I like immediately I had like a ton of contacts. Like, not, it took time to develop close friendships as these things do, but I quickly became a guy that knows people, and just having that level of connectedness was very, very valuable. And, as I said, it just expanded my horizons so much just to see all these different approaches to doing things and just achieving projects and realizing your own creative visions. It's really fantastic. I had a question about that, but I don't remember it. Oh yeah, no, I do. So when I went to Montreal to do that, I used Craigslist, I used meetup.com, I used Facebook, just look for events. So doing the same thing in Germany, like, what were the resources you used to get a foot in the door? Like, how do you find these networking events in the first place? Like, did you use the IHK, like the Industrie- und Handelskammer, or like?
No. So first of all, it wasn't restricted to Germany. I travel a lot for work, and
Gotcha.
whenever
So,
I travel anywhere, I try to meet people.
mhm,
And even if I travel to meet a friend somewhere, although it's usually connected to a business trip, but I always beforehand do my research and try to find something. So there are two ways to meet people for me, and none of those have anything to do with conventional networking events,
gotcha.
because part of creating and forging an authentic and genuine bond is experiencing something together that is unique to the two of you, which is not necessarily the case at conventions. I mean, yes, I've been to conventions to represent a project and to link with clients. And yes, it brings you in clients, but it's more of a marketplace, a convention. It's exhausting. You give the same
It
speech to
is.
everyone you meet,
Yeah.
but it's also not personal,
I found that
unless. you're weird like me and you make weird jokes and random comments and people are like, wait,
Right.
what did you just say to me? Okay, that's interesting. What conversation am I a part of
True.
right now? But then it's not really sales per se. It's kind of like, oh, well, you're here, I'm here, we're both exhausted, we're both dehydrated, and the light is just really bizarre. So let's just talk about something else. But
Yeah.
generally,
I think the best
and
way,
yeah,
like,
comment on that.
if you want to leverage a classical, typical networking event for yourself, you need to just break the rules in there. Because otherwise, like all the networking events I went to, like networking events to me, I still, like I went for a long time and I used to have them in my regular rotation of there's just things to visit and just people to meet. Um, but it always felt like they were always the least, or I could even say like they barely ever got me any contacts. Used to go. I went to a networking event. And it's just like, here's my business card. You have these people who shove their business cards in your face before they even say something about themselves, and then they give you a prepared pitch about who they are and what they do. And I'm like, dude, I didn't talk to a person just now. I talked to a product, you know. And I felt like that myself as well. I felt like I was pitching myself, and sorry.
Bless you.
Thanks. Yeah, so I relate to
And
your
it's
experience with that.
uncomfortable. I
Yeah,
mean, there are different forms of sales, but to me, just that being a human billboard is not something that
yeah,
I can do. And as much of an outgoing person as I am, I really stiffen up if I'm supposed to just approach someone, a stranger, and pitch something to them because I wouldn't like it. So I can't do it myself.
mm,
So how do I actually meet people? Well, the two
yes,
ways that I spoke of before is the one way is to meet people through people you know. There's always more weight to that because we're more likely to trust someone if someone we know can vouch for them. But also, if someone I know introduces me to someone, they are guaranteed to find a link between the two of us, and that's why they intend to
yeah.
introduce us.
That's why
So
they
there's a
wanna.
lot of quality and a lot of merit
Yeah,
to those encounters, because you kind of know a little bit more about their history as people, as professionals, and you already have something, or at the very least someone in common. Simultaneously, I'm always careful when I introduce people, because if I were to introduce A to B and then A pulls a D move on B, then it makes
that
me look
damages
bad
your
too.
reputation.
Uh,
Yeah,
it damages my reputation. But it's also interesting because it means the larger your network is, the quicker it grows. Because
yes,
if you know 10 people and each of those 10 people introduces you to 3 people, and then each of those 30 people introduces you to another 3 people, it's bizarre. It picks up very, very quickly. So
mm,
that's the one way. And then the other way, if it's not through direct connections, is, I guess, project based. If you're working on something and you need someone for it, or they're working on something and you're interested in it, you kind of just approach them and talk about it, kind of like you and me with this podcast. I
mm,
mean, a listener doesn't know me personally, but they are getting to know me through your podcast as an
yeah,
example. And they might be like, oh, what she's talking about is related to this thing that I'm doing. Maybe I'll just reach out to her and say, hey, are you interested in commenting on it? Or are you interested in working on this project? Or I do this. Do you have a project that perhaps needs a skill? Like, we are definitely on the same wavelength when it
mm,
comes to our activities. And even though we don't know each other, and it might not even be a contact of yours, yeah, let's connect. Why not? Show me what you got. Tell me about yourself. This is me. Let me tell you about myself. This is what I have. And kind of just, a lot of the people I work with, they tend to like me as a person because I work in the horror industry. But as a service provider, there's a lot I can do for someone as long as it's in that genre. So they tend to relate to me, identify with me as a person, and same feelings from my end to them. And then they know, okay, somehow on something, I want to work with you. I don't know what it is yet, but I want to work
Yes.
with you on something because we have the same philosophies, ideas, and sometimes it's a specific project, but sometimes it's a case of, okay, let's pull in your means, let's pull in my means, let's create a project together. Let's make something happen. And those sometimes turn out to be the most fascinating ones because it's not a cookie cutter model that you're moving forward with. You are taking two very unique people with their very unique circles, and you are creating something completely new that has never existed and will never exist because this specific constellation is unique.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic. I mean, some of my favorite projects currently are happening because of such a situation. But you don't have to know that person personally or through a contact at first. It's not at a convention. It's because of some really weird specific situation, and then both people are just open to the idea of meeting someone new. So those are my two ways to go about things. Again, I've tried the networking. And it's not my thing. And another thing I will add when it comes to networking, because this is very important to me as well, is that a lot of people think it's extremely important to constantly cultivate your network. And the fact of the matter is, some people are introverts and some people are shy, but they're damn good at what it is they do. And I don't think it's fair to tell everyone that they need to push themselves to cultivate that network. If you can, and you should always be pushing yourself in some way, then go for it. But if that's just not who you are, the only networks you need are close people you trust who can give you enough work or enough projects. Not everyone has to be an extrovert. Simultaneously, not everyone who's an extrovert is more valuable to a project. So when it comes to these kind of projects and networking and stuff like that, it's always like, okay, just the very first step should be try to get to know yourself and your style and who you are. And even if you can't answer that right away, just take the next step and then see how you react to it and see how it feels. And then figure out what's the next step from there. Some people have an ultimate goal, but I was one of those people who the things that I do now, I didn't know it was a career. So I didn't have an ultimate goal. I was figuring things out. I had a direction. And then I took it one step at a time. So yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tricky one, but really be clever and take it one step at a time, and don't force yourself to be someone you're not. And then networking will work because you'll be genuine and authentic.
That took me a long time to learn in many respects, that don't try to force yourself to be someone you're not, right? Because it's so easy to fall into that trap, or just to see how people connect or how people do a certain thing that you want to achieve in life, and then be like, oh, I guess that's what I need to do. When that's not necessarily true, because it was right for that person, but it's not right for you. And that can be really difficult to figure out, who am I? How do I approach things in life? And how do I want to approach this specific thing that I want to achieve, right? That can be a very daunting task. Let's circle back to something you said a bit earlier. You said when you travel or you go to visit somebody, you do your research beforehand. What does that look like? You go online, you figure out, like, what's the entertainment industry like in that town? Or like what exactly, or do you line up a couple of events that you want to go to while you're there?
So I don't really go to events. It has to be something really fascinating for me to say, oh, I want to be in a room with lots and lots of people.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, but what I tend to do, it depends on the project that I have on at the time. And then depending on the project that I'm currently promoting or cultivating, I look for companies and individuals that work in that direction and in that field. and I just email them and say,
No
hey,
way. That's
I'm working
awesome.
on this. I'm going to be in your hood. I know we don't know each other, but I really liked what you're doing. Are you interested in meeting up for a coffee?
That's
And
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of people won't, a lot of companies especially won't reply, but a lot of people will. And
So
then
let's
some will say,
say,
I'm sorry, I don't, it's in a few days. My schedule is full, but thanks for messaging me. And some people will say yes. And then you meet those people, and then suddenly you know a radio DJ in Stockholm or something like that.
it's
It's
fucking
like
brilliant.
super random.
And it is the
But
best
you
way of
can't
doing it,
spam them.
really. Yeah.
It's not about spamming them. It's really unique, and I'm already approaching them with what I do and my merits. And I also say, but it's not because I need anything from you. I really just want to get to know you because I want to know what your side of business is like in the country and city that you work with. Feel free to say no, but I found you, and I really like what you do. And then you just see what they say.
So let's say you message 10 people, you get one. Or is that like
I mean,
is there a way to put a number on it for you in your
well, it
experience?
super depends on the industry, because I feel like if you go to more independent people, then they'll almost all reply,
Mm,
especially because, and again, in my industry, in the horror industry, although it's worldwide, it's a small community if you really look at the grand scheme of things. So even if I messaged someone in LA, chances are that we have at least a dozen friends in common from the industry. And Facebook's great for that, because when
yeah.
you see the people you have in common, even if I'm approached by a stranger for a meetup, which happens as well, I can tell by the contacts we have in common whether this is going to be a quality link or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
So if it's someone who kind
Social
of
proof right
just
there.
approached, yeah, and again, like people and their name adding merit to someone else that I've never met before.
Yeah.
And what I also tend to do when I'm approached by a stranger, or even get like friends requests from people that I've never met any before, I message the friends we have in common before I reply to them, and I say, who is this person and how
Mm-hmm.
do I know
Yeah.
them?
You do your
and
research, you
and
do
they'll
your
be like,
homework.
don't know. I've got like 5,000 friends on Facebook and I don't know this person. Or they'll be like, oh, they're this and this person. And so even if I then accept the message or accept the friend request, I message them and I say, we've never met, I believe. So let's get to know each other, because I really only have people on Facebook that I know personally.
Right.
So I need to know who you are. Otherwise, I can't be your friend on this platform. And they are like, okay, hilarious. All right, well, this is who I am. This is my website. I heard about you through this or that, or I saw your comment under this post, and I just share the same views as you. So I thought maybe we should like link up online. And then suddenly something that could have been spam otherwise turns into something with merit. So
Mm,
it really depends on how you approach it as well. But for example, I find that in the film industry, like all things independent filmmakers, they're open to it, because it's all about like, oh, and again, horror is very unique and different from the rest of the industry. You like horror, I like horror, we're friends now. Like that's how horror works, and it
yeah.
doesn't mean that you should start using that as a cheap and easy branding tool to meet new people. But because if you aren't genuinely a fan of horror, then a horror fan will sniff you out and you have no chance. But generally, if you're in the community and you don't have like a horrible bad reputation for something, then you'll be fine. But then, for example, the music industry, I find it's very different. There are cool, grounded people from the industry, but a lot of the companies I find are very arrogant
Mm,
and very snobbish. I find a lot of musicians are either super defensive right away, or they too have a large ego. And I find the music industry to be really, really difficult. Simultaneously, I find the non-independent film industry to be very, very difficult as well. I feel like a lot of pockets of entertainment and art, and again, it's a defensive move, a lot of people have gotten to the point where they're like, well, if this isn't an obviously paying gig, I don't know why we should be talking about anything. And that's a shame, because a lot of while there are gigs that need to be paid for so you can live off of something, the idea of an artist or a company institution in the arts should be to constantly produce something.
Yeah.
And some of that is paid and some of that is low budget or no budget. You constantly have to be doing something. And
I don't understand that kind of thinking where you're like, you're more interested in the bottom line than I mean, that's what it boils down to, isn't it? Right? Like if they say, okay, if this isn't a paying gig, why would I bother? Because you love what you do and you love people who do what you do. I mean, I'm working for a client right now, and financially this project is a shit show. You know, like they're gonna pay me. I'm not gonna put numbers on it, but you know, they're gonna pay me a certain amount, and the amount of hours I put in, they should be paying me at this point, and the project's not done. They should be paying me twice that much. But I don't care because I really like these people. I do this. I put in a couple of hours every weekend. I do a little bit in the evenings. You know, when work is done, like when I finish with my day's work, I do a little bit more for them. You know, I sit down with them. I chat with them. They're great people, first of all, and secondly, I just love what I'm doing. This is fun. I'm enjoying building this website for them, you know. And there's a bunch of stuff that I did, like at one point it was half done, and I realized, okay, like something is buggy about it, and I didn't know what it was, and I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'll just rebuild the website, you know. And I set up a new instance of WordPress, and I put the buggy one in. I left it online, or I actually downloaded them both on my computer, and I made a fresh one. And then I just rebuilt the thing, you know, like it took a couple of hours, like let's say four hours or something, you know, until the new one was the same, but it was clean and it was more efficient. I also ironed out design deficiencies that the previous one had, you know. I made it leaner, I made it cleaner, and it worked better. And of course, I'm not charging them for that, you know. It was just because I felt like I can improve this and I can learn from this. I can become a better professional. And, you know, I do have the time. It is my spare time. And in the end, I know that they already told me, listen, if this is going over budget, we'll just pay you more. Doesn't matter. So, you know, at the end, I'm just going to tell them, listen, I did this many hours. Just throw as much money on top as you feel comfortable with. And
as you can.
Fine, you know.
Well, and then the big difference there is that it's personal to you and you have a lot of freedom to do what it is you enjoy. It becomes an issue when people come to you expecting you to do it for free or for very little money.
Oh God, yeah.
And they still want to micromanage you and tell you what to do. And first of all, some of the people, even if they are people you know in person, it's like, you can't just come to me and expect me to do that.
No.
And second of all, if I'm doing it for pennies, you also can't expect me to give you something that would usually cost a lot of money, because that is disrespectful. It's also presumptuous. And it's not fair, because what you don't want to do is create an environment of dumping prices where people offer their labor and services for so cheap that the competitive market means that people can't live off of the hours and hours of work that they put into it. You don't want to do that. But like you were saying, this is a project with people you really like that you do in your spare time. And you can basically do whatever you want because they're just grateful. So you can maybe grow new skills, try some stuff out, you know, just somehow put something in there that is very personal to you. That's a completely different environment than if someone comes up and says, I want a website, and you tell them, well, it costs X $1,000 to make because that's just the standard if you really want to have a website built from scratch. And they're like, oh, well, we have 200. I didn't know it was going to be that expensive.
You can't work with somebody like that.
I can get a website for 200 from someone in Southeast Asia on
I just
Fiverr.
had that.
What? So then go there. Fine. I don't what.
exactly. Just do that, because like you want quality, you got to pay for quality. Like, I mean, I got to where I am right now. Um, I still feel like a complete moron that knows nothing, you know? And I think that's
Imposter
sort of the
syndrome.
imposter syndrome because I never studied web design or marketing or anything like that. You know, I studied German and English.
What do you mean you don't have the paperwork to
Exactly. Like,
qualify you
so
for a job?
I have
How
to
dare
suck,
you?
right? Um, but so I
No
have that
jobs for you.
imposter syndrome, you know, I feel like I know nothing. But then again, when I look at my body of work and at the amount of things that I have learned and that I am capable of pulling off at this point, realistically, I think I'm already pretty good, actually, you know. Um, and yeah, of course, that costs money, you know, like like this, and that's what you just said, right? That's the difference between you calculate as a professional, you calculate what am I getting out of that if it's not money, you know.
Mm,
And in this
mm.
case, I'm getting the personal growth, I'm getting the relationship with these people that I'm working with, and I'm getting a potential for the future because these are people that I want to keep working with, you know?
Yeah.
And if
And
they
it's a
grow,
reference to something that's all you, because if you're hired to do something, you need to compromise your vision for what the
yeah,
client wants. And as a creative, I think most creatives want to hopefully be booked for their style.
yeah,
But if you never have the opportunity to develop and demonstrate what your style is, it will always only be people who hire you and then tell you what to do, as opposed to, oh, I want a classic matte website. How
yeah,
else are you going to create that? So the time you're investing is basically portfolio building, which makes a lot of sense.
absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, yeah, something else, some sort of value has to come out of it because that's what you know, that's entirely true. If somebody says, well, I'm only going to pay this much. And it's always that, you know, you mentioned something that is so true. um, the same clients that aren't willing to pay much are the clients that are willing that are going to cause you the most work because
Headaches.
they
Yeah.
micromanage you. They want that change, they want that changed, and then you design something and they don't know what they want their website to look like, that but they do know that it's not what you just did. That's always, you know, and then you do something else. No, no, not that either, you know. They anyway, that's like, yeah,
But
that
yeah,
can be, that's a long story.
swinging back around, because you asked me how I got to horror professionally,
Yeah,
and
let's
I
go
know
back
we
to
came
that.
through it there. Let's go back to that. So what happened was I worked in the industry for several years in a non-horror capacity, but I
So the
did
entertainment industry.
the entertainment industry, the arts industry, and the networking industry, if you want to call it that. But I always had an interest in the same things. And it wasn't until, so I got to this point where I was like, I want to make horror stuff. I want to make horror music. That's what it started with. And I pulled
What
together,
year are we in now?
this is 2017,
Gotcha.
maybe the end of 2016, but like, yeah, around that time, early
So
2017,
you
late
slowly
2016.
became like you were the person who knew everybody, who was very well connected and who connected people with each other
Everybody
while
is well
working in
adjusted.
the entertainment industry, making
Yeah,
music, being creative.
yeah, just
You
doing
transitioned,
a good hustle. And
right.
then at some point I was like, okay, well, regardless of work, I want to do things that are creepier and more horror themed. It's what I'm into. Generally that was a phase in my life when I was just changing things. I was cutting things out that didn't fulfill me anymore. I was letting things in that were unusual but did fulfill me. Just listening way more to my gut, and being strong enough to really give my life an overhaul, because although I was already doing something unusual, it I didn't feel like I was quite where I wanted to be yet. So I put together a team with a sound engineer and a co-composer, and I said, okay, this is now a team that makes horror music, and you guys are into it and I'm into it. Let's start a
Oh,
company.
nice.
And then I went to the UK for a film festival in Liverpool, and I started, because I had in the back of my mind, I now have this team of people that makes horror themed music. I started, whenever I heard anyone who did something with horror, whether they were like designers or filmmakers or whatever, I went to them and say, hey, I have a team that makes horror themed music. Do you need music for anything? And it took the step of creating it before there was something there to give me something to seek out the opportunities. It wasn't the other way around. I was like, this is what I want to do. It doesn't exist yet, so I'm going to do it. And in Germany, although a lot of fantastic horror filmmakers and horror artists come from Germany, they tend to not establish themselves until they've left Germany. So although Germany had lots of talent, they were hidden in pockets or they had already left the country. So it wasn't the best place. And I had to just book tickets to random places and meet people there. And I went to lots of different countries and continents, and was just, like just finding orientation. So because of that, I started meeting horror filmmakers, and I didn't necessarily want to work in the film industry, but it kind of made sense. If you're going to make music and if you're going to make horror music, you need to be affiliated to the film industry. Again, it was an industry I was really staying clear of because of the stereotypes behind it, but that's where I ended up. And then I realized, okay, well, if we're a service provider for sound design and music, then we need to provide other services to raise the chances of getting clients. So we started taking in photography. Eventually, we started taking in design as well, packaging, all that stuff. Eventually, I started using my clients and my partners to upgrade to events as well. And then eventually I realized I knew enough people who work in film to also offer film production. So if someone wanted to organize a shoot or whatever for their project, whether it was here or someone else, I started knowing enough people to say, whatever country you want to shoot in, let me know and I'll put together something for you. So it just started growing and growing. And then eventually I got to the point very soon after, maybe a year or two after. So basically a year ago from now, when I realized, well, hot damn, you can either wait for clients to come and hire you and, give you work, or you can become a producer, not just like a line producer yourself, and start putting together projects and hire your own people. So there's like a nice blend of, on the one hand, people coming to you and saying, I know you do horror. I need something really random. Provide me the specialists and some consultation. Okay, great. But on the other hand, not waiting for people and really pitching and growing these bigger projects that your people will be attached to, a nice blend. So you're not completely dependent on the market's movements, but you're also not completely dependent on the success of your pitches in your own projects. Just a really nice mix. And that turned out to be really smart because the more I started building my own projects, and when I have a project, I like it to be unique. Even when I'm being hired by someone, I want it to have something that is world changing in one aspect or another, whether it's the procedure and how it's produced, or it's a combination of the people involved or the story or how it's presented, whether it's a client of mine or it's my own project. I want it to feel like this thing, although it's really just supposed to scare and entertain people. There's something about it that is unique and extraordinary, even in the littlest details that the public might not ever hear of, but can if you want to. And suddenly, I started growing, and this is where it became fantastic, because as a human being, I fit in the horror community, not just because of my interests, but because of my very self-deprecating, dark humor, kind of authentic, tolerant kind of way. That's what the community is all about. Very unique individuals, dark sense of humor. Most people who are fans of horror have survived something, and I'm intentionally using the word survived, and came out the other end with that dark sense of humor and just being like, well, I guess I'm still alive, time to deal. And I always say people who survive something big, if they work in entertainment or art, there are two directions. You either become a comedian or you do horror films. Some people do both.
So fucking true.
I know. Yeah, so I felt right at home. And what then happened, especially what's been happening over the last 2 years. So my company has effectively existed for the last 2 or 3 years, 3 years probably. But the last 2 years, when I really pushed myself to go out and kind of get rid of that fear that people would meet me and be like, what, you didn't start working in horror until you were 29? That's so old. That's what I was expecting people to say. But the horror community is different. They're like, damn, you're a cool person. That's a cool idea. Go for it. Go get it.
Bam.
Go.
Yeah.
And I'm like, ooh, okay, yes, thank you for the support.
So
and
cool.
and people are way more encouraging because everything's really unique. Everyone's got the hustle going on. And no project is the same twice. So there's the competition is not the same. It doesn't feel as ugly and competitive. And I'm still talking about independent. I'm not talking about like the big companies, but the horror industry is mostly independent. And it was just so cool to be around people who understood what you were all about. You understood them. And there was just so much like encouragement and appreciation. So yeah, the last 1 or 2 years, it wasn't just about having a network. I've been growing a reputation because I've been treating people with respect. I've been treating projects with respect. I've been asked to work on really high profile people out of the blue and effectively in other pockets of the industry with not enough references because they just knew I worked hard and I was always going to be honest. And so they supported it. And it's been absolutely fantastic, just a ride. And then this year, starting to do more online as well. It's really, it's everything has kind of just exploded and I'm meeting these amazing people and they're all just awesome human beings. And right now it kind of feels like a trip because I'm working on projects that I never dreamed of working on. And it's just, I don't know, it feels like I'm on the fast bit of the roller coaster right now. And it's just a ride. And I don't think I've ever loved my life as much as I do right now, as crazy as it sounds. But yeah, that's where I am. And that's how I got here.
That really is amazing. Like it's so inspiring listening to that. Like it feels like it kind of pumps you a little bit, you know, like I'm like, yeah, man, that's the spirit, you know, like go girl. That's really great.
Don't wait for anything.
Yeah,
just do it.
Absolutely.
Have a concept and then just follow
and I mean,
through.
just that whole story. I mean, you started out like I mean, at this point, if I understand correctly, what you have there is a little agency, right? Like you started out making music for horror, and then you know, it became more. It became photography. It became other genres that got in there, and now you're even, you know, taking care of shoots.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, I call us a service provider because effectively when other people approach us, we are providing a service. We're taking whatever they have and we're trying to do the best we can to make it great.
You're a service provider for the horror industry.
Yeah, we do
crossover
projects with like whether it's like fantasy or sci-fi, sometimes dramas or comedies, but horror is our focus. So if you need anything related to horror and you come to us, chances are the perfect expert for you is a phone call away. And I tend to then also act as a producer or creative director and a consultant above all things. And I can pull in people from all over the world. And that's another thing, like a lot of the horror community, sorry, my connection. So that's another thing, a lot of the horror community, again, and it's not atypical to, on certain levels, still have only your immediate environment. So whilst people who have been doing it for 40 years, and God bless them, I love having chats with some of those legends that for some reason are now, you know, on my WhatsApp chat or in my emails, like, you know, I'm super grateful. But then a lot of the independent filmmakers, maybe they have funding for a film or for an event or an album or whatever it is. But because of where the money is coming from, they have to go to a certain place, or depending on the concept and who they already have involved, there have to be certain restrictions with budget or with tax or with whatever. And it's really hard for them to delve into the paperwork, to know people, and to know people who are good enough in whatever region it is. So most of my clients, if not almost all my clients, are outside of Germany. But for example, if I did get someone who was like, I want to do this, I'm a German project manager, and I actually can even scrape together funds to make it happen, but I think filming in Germany would be too expensive. Like, how can you help me make this film? And I could be like, okay, well, let me suggest this country or that state or this and that, because with that budget, we can make it work. And if we put together this team and that gear and equipment, then, we can make it work. We can make it happen. And then you get like this high quality concept that was effectively produced across maybe 3 continents or more. But how is that person supposed to do it on their own?
I'm very much hearing the connector in you still there.
It absolutely. I've made it part of my career.
Exactly. You just integrated it. And it's funny because like you were, like, it sounds like throughout the career path that you've had so far, you just shaped puzzle pieces and then you started putting them together, right? I mean, you do music. That's a puzzle piece of what you do now. You did this connecting thing, connecting people thing, and that's a part of what you do now. 2 things that I want to go back to that I took note of when you were talking. One is when you talked about music. Personally, I'm an audiophile, or let's say I'm just a big fan of surround sound. I have 2 surround sound systems in my home. Like I have a 7.1 here in this room, and then we have 5.1 downstairs. And the other day I was watching It Follows, and that movie has an ingenious surround mix, because the music is mixed in a way that it really utilizes all speakers to fantastic effect. So for instance, in that scene when she is fleeing, like they're at the beach, right? They go to that beach house, and then the monster pops out and attacks her, and she jumps in the car and flees. And you have like the music, for those of you who haven't seen that movie, is like a very synthesizer, electronica type of music. So you have like the synthesizer sound effect going left and right in the rear speakers while that scene is playing out. And it's so unnerving because it just goes behind your head all the time from left to right. And the way they use panning there, it's just the movie gets a whole new dimension by having surround sound, by having a surround mix that elevates an already great movie to just brilliance in my mind, just auditory brilliance. And I feel that's something, just the whole horror genre is a genre that really benefits from surround mixing, because when you think surround sound, you think of action movies, right? You're like, yeah, explosions and bullets whizzing and helicopters and shit flying all around the room. That's what surround sound is supposed to be about. But the horror genre can really benefit so much from that, because if you're trying to establish a scary environment and a scary atmosphere, audio mixing, audio editing plays an absolutely integral part. And I noticed that too in video games, obviously. When I played Amnesia: The Dark Descent, it's great to play it in the dark and with headphones on, which is what they actually recommend before you, like when you start the game, there's like a text that says you should play this game in the dark with headphones on. But it becomes even more immersive when the monster that's on your heels is audibly on your heels. It is behind you. It's coming up behind you. It's an incredible effect, and it is so effective. So somewhere in there is a question. I'm wondering, like, is that something? Have you had similar experiences? Do you feel the same way about that? Is that something that you bear in mind when you create music, or is that it's just the whole sound mixing process something that is then out of your hands and is in the hands of whoever's making the movie?
One of the reasons why I wanted to do horror music in the first place is because so much sound design goes into tracks that are used for the horror genre, even if it is just a conventional song or sound. You can put more into it. For example, did for the trailer for a film festival in Manchester. I did the music for the festival trailer with my team. We did it, and the song is called "Shut the Front Door," and the reason why it's called that was because. And I can give you a link to. I think the trailer should still be online, but I'll send you a link to the trailer so you guys will see it in the description down below. For GRIMMFEST, I can't remember. I think it might have been 2017. But I'll double check, maybe 2018, I'll double check. But the bass in the beat of that is actually a door shutting during a thunderstorm. And because it's a door slamming closed, it's not a clean boom. Like if you have a bass drum, it's like a boom, boom. And there was something organic and alive about it that just made a great, like a boom, boom, like in the rhythm. And that, which is supposed to, when I showed it to people and asked them like, what are you imagining? They heard spiders, but what it is in fact is a comb, and you're like pulling over the teeth of the comb. And that's the base of the beat. And then towards the middle of the song, there's this part where we had a violinist just like stroke up like a glissando up. And then at the same time, it like morphs into a different sound because we then midpoint mixed it into a scream that we had slowed down. So you hear that noise and you don't really recognize what it is. And then suddenly the noise starts to break and you realize it's a human scream. So it's something, and that's something I love doing in or generally in horror concepts as well. You are visualizing or hearing something and you think it's one thing, but then in the end you realize this whole time it was something else, that punchline of any good creepy story. But then how do you do that as an audio? And that was like an effect that's an example of that. And
I love transitions like that. There's one in a song by a band called Nemesis. I believe they're Swedish or Norwegian or something. There's like the woman is the female singer is singing or finishing a stanza on a high note, and as she's singing that note, a guitar comes in, an e-guitar, the solo begins on that same note, and it just one dissolves into the other, and you cannot hear where her voice ends and the guitar starts. It's just one flow, and it's brilliant. And the same thing, like there's the classic "Don't Look Now," that movie at the beginning. There's I believe when the kid dies, and then you have like Julie Christie screams, and then it cuts, and you see Donald Sutherland drilling into a wall with a power drill, and the sound of the scream becomes the sound of the power drill.
Yeah, exactly.
And that just blows your mind. That's just sound editing at its best.
There is so much. I mean, you were talking about the surround sound, but in the end, when it comes to sound design and music for horror concepts, there is so much psychology in it. Yeah. Because you have to tell a story with the sound before anyone even sees the image. Something you see in horror films a lot, for example, is, someone's just walking down a hallway. It looks totally normal, but the music is getting tense, which means before the character is even aware of the threat, we are being told, there's a threat.
Shit's real.
And you can use that to either build up so much tension that the scare is more effective, or you build up tension and then just take it away because you have averted expectations. But the sound is doing that. We're just watching someone potentially walk through a hallway. And again, like what direction is it coming from? The left to right, you were talking about like a disorientation. A lot of sound when it comes to horror is also using really low basses and simultaneously really high frequencies and taking the medium, the middle parts out of it, which is so weird because there's like no connection to the vibrations that our body's picking up.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, you know, because there's a lot of work with electronic music, but you try to work with distortion, whether it's a distortion of the notes or the speeds, which works really well with physically played instruments, which is why no matter how much I do electronically, I always get instrumentalists into the studio, because distorting the music can also have the effect of the viewer / listener having their senses impaired due to fear. So you can actually trick them into feeling an emotion just by distorting sound the right way. So there's so much you can do. And I was always fascinated by the possibilities when it came to music and sound design in horror, which is why I wanted to do it, not knowing how much it was going to escalate, but I wanted to create more of that. And I've worked in projects, you know, not film projects, but like where you use with colleagues that whose company has a device that can calculate the frequencies for a certain area. So you can stand physically in the room and it sounds like someone's whispering into your ear. And it's super creepy. Or one event that I organized, or installation that I organized with my team was for the Liverpool Tattoo Convention, which is, I think, the largest tattoo convention in the country, in the UK, I believe. And the one entire floor was dedicated to horror. And we were allowed to take a room and turn it into an installation. And what we did was, because it was like this room in the basement of a really grand hotel, we set up sofas in a circle around a pillar, and the pillar was lit with LED lights that changed color in sync with the sound. And the sound was a 10-minute audio file or audio depiction of the, sorry, let me just take a sip really now.
Yep, all good.
And the audio file was a 10-minute depiction of the most frequently dreamt nightmares. So you would hear it and you would have the nightmare in mind. Like, we researched what are the nightmares people dream of the most. And simultaneously, the room was filled with smells and scents that were created through aroma diffusers. So the moment you entered the room, the smell already told you you are somewhere else. But then and this was the theme of the room was horror zen. So I wanted a zen room that was horror themed, and people told me it couldn't work. And I said, I will prove you wrong. So you would then, after entering this scented room, and everything was on a loop, and some people stayed there for hours. It was terrifying. You could then sit on a sofa in this circle and just stare at this pillar that was lit and changing colors whilst you were hearing nightmares, but brilliant. Really done in a way so you could imagine it. And I was, interviewing or talking to some people who left the room. And whilst I'd say 10% weren't fazed by it at all, probably 20% thought it was terrifying, 20% thought it was relaxing, and the other 50% said it was both terrifying and relaxing, and they don't understand how that's physically possible. I was like, yes, horror zen room, we did it. But it was because it was at this tattoo convention and it was loud, there was a lot going on.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to take people out of that environment. And I wanted to provide both. And some people, they were comparing, some people came out really freaked out, like they couldn't actually do it because it reminded them of like a drug trip or something. And they said they couldn't, like they just couldn't do it. And that's why these kind of rooms, even though there's like no blood or gore or whatever, I tend to say they're 18 and up because, I want people to be aware of the maturity you require to go into this. So if you are uncomfortable, you just leave. But it's a physical experience. Again, it's not a movie, but it's a physical horror experience that uses so much psychology and how your body functions to put you into a completely different situation than anything you've ever experienced.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm all about. And sound is a big part of that.
So interesting. So interesting.
I like it. Invite you to one sometime.
Yeah, yeah. I was reminded of the SAT, Société des Arts Technologiques, which is an building and I guess society or an organization in Montreal. They have the whole building, the whole place is dedicated to technology and arts. So, for instance, I went there when they revealed or when they announced Borderlands back in 2009, the game. Like the developers were there and they were showing off the game. And then there was another one in 2015. I think the game was Dishonored or something. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's truly interesting. And then on the top floor, they have a giant dome, like a planetarium kind of dome. And they had they regularly did these like 3D movies that like you would lie on your back on the ground on like pillows and stuff, and you would look up and they would project like 3D stuff into that dome. And that was always a terrific experience. So I would like to loop back to something that you said earlier that I think we can go into a little deeper. That is truly interesting to me. And it's horror as a coping mechanism. Because you said most people who like horror have survived something. And I found that certainly true for myself. And I found that true for people I know. Like it's funny, like it's a gut feeling. It's not even a mental, it's not even the thing that I think about first, but it's just a gut feeling. It's like when I meet somebody and they like horror, there's something there. There's something that makes them more interesting to me. There's something that I don't know why. Like I feel like there's some sort of intellectual challenge that I can live with these people. Some sort of intellectual experience. That it might be me just being conceited or something, or just full of myself because I like horror. But I kind of got that impression that that's certainly true. That what you said, most people who like horror have survived something. And I want to go into that a little deeper. Why would you say that? Like, how's your experience shown you that? I mean, your personal experience, I guess, is the sleep. Jesus, why am I not thinking of the word?
Paralysis.
Sleep paralysis.
I mean, amongst other things, I had quite a few challenges growing up as well that we don't need to dive into, but definitely not the easiest of starts in life. And I think to comment on what you were saying about meeting someone and feeling like, you know, you can somehow relate to them. It takes a particular personality type to say, I like horror films. Like, even if you've seen a horror film that you liked, you might say, oh, I liked Get Out, but you won't say, I like horror films. So to say I like horror films means, you know, you've seen horror films and you are drawn to them. And to be that kind of person, you need to have some sort of desensitization to things, which is usually also a result of confrontation to certain subject matter. A lot of people are also still hung up on the stigma that horror films are really just about sexism and blood, and that is baloney. Because horror films, there is such a vast array of horror films that you can watch, and while some of them will be about chicks with big boobs running through a puddle of blood, that is what they wanted to do, and that they are entitled to make that kind of film, and you are entitled to watch it. But there's more to horror than that. And a lot of horror filmmakers are interested in a lot of very different things. And put that in their movies. So the question is, you know, why is horror a coping mechanism? Now, I'm not a professor, or, you know, even expert is relative, but you have to imagine that you are in a safe environment. So let's say you are in your living room, or even usually a movie theater or these days a drive-in, but it's a safe environment. And suddenly you have, 1 to 2 hours of tension and fear and what feels like life-threatening circumstances. And then suddenly it's over and you turn it off and you're still safe.
Yeah.
So it's about experiencing something that's adrenaline inducing and emotion inducing in a controlled environment.
Yeah.
So that already helps you, kind of like what we were saying about dreams before, kind of do practice runs with lots of different emotions in a safe environment without real life consequences, as long as your maturity level or what you're capable of processing matches what you consume, which is why I'm still very much an advocate of not every horror film is for every horror fan. And it's good that there are also age restrictions on certain stuff. But again, as long as you follow certain guidelines, it's safe and you're safe afterwards. You might go to bed and you might get, as the Germans say, Kopfkino, or literally translated Headcinema, hence the name of my company, Headcinema Projections. But in the end, when it's gone, you're still safe. It's really just your mind kind of taking you for a ride, and it's something you can learn to process. But the coping mechanism it doesn't stop there. It comes from the fact that many of the films that dive into really tough issues and topics, they are often a way for filmmakers to process things as well.
Yeah.
It could be the fear of the dark, and it could be the loss of a child. There are lots of different, really hardcore topics.
It's funny. It took me a long time to realize that Indiana Jones and Star Wars, and even Starship Troopers, was ways of directors from that generation to process the Nazi regime. I mean, it was so obvious when you think about it, like obviously Schindler's List that's of course what it's about, but even in Star Wars you have like all the imagery, they have all that reverberating, the whole fascism,
the foreign thing, as well, and the fascism.
You have that reverberating through these movies, and it took me a while. I mean, it's on the nose in Indiana Jones. I mean, the Nazis are there, and in Starship Troopers, it's just brilliantly disguised. You need to look a little closer to understand what this movie is about. But I find that this is filmmakers processing what they learned, right, about what happened, because like they were born in Paul Verhoeven, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg. They were all, I would guess, I would have to look it up, but born in the 40s, give or take, right? So the war was just over, and then when they were 20 something in the 60s, all the shit came out that actually the Nazis did, and they were processing that, and it took me a while to realize, wait a minute, that's what they were doing in their movies. They were creating great entertainment, but it was for them a way to deal with that.
Well. Anything that's horror, sci-fi, or even fantasy, but anything that seems so surreal and distant from life is really packaging something else. Another famous example for that is the show The Twilight Zone, which came out, mid-century, whatever. And when it was originally pitched, it had nothing to do with everything that makes it the show we know it to be now. It was supposed to be socially critical, and it was supposed to be a commentary on human and society in terms of its, behavior and nature. And they didn't want to produce it. But once the creators said, okay, well, it's going to be weird though. It's going to have aliens and monsters and supernatural elements, are like, oh, that's a cool show. But that's why you look at the episodes now and they all have social commentary, because that was the initial point of the show, but it didn't get approved until it became weird, and then it was approved. But, returning back to this processing of stuff, when you are an audience member and then you watch these really serious issues wrapped in a horror film, if you have been through very tragically that particular thing yourself, then it's helping you overcome it in a different facet of your life, or at least feel like other people get your pain, your fear, and that can give you a sense of, even a faint sense of reassurance. But simultaneously, if you haven't been through that, and you're watching a film about something that you can't personally relate to, it also gives you a sense of empathy, because it's giving you that feeling that someone else had. And even if it's in an artistic form, and it has to be, because sometimes it doesn't hit closely enough to home if you just talk about it happening, especially even more than ever these days with the internet. We read horrible headlines all the freaking time. So the sober information is not enough for us to feel anything anymore, because we're used to hearing about accidents where people die tragically or lose their homes. Like, we hear it and we just go, just another day on planet Earth. But to watch a film where it's focused down and we magnify the emotions, even if it is metaphorical, we magnify the emotions of someone in a specific situation, we only then sometimes can understand what it means to go through that particular fear or tragedy. And it helps us cultivate empathy, which is something that true horror fans, that is probably what you're connecting to. There's an openness to other lives and other stories, and there's a genuine interest. It's not like, oh, how are you doing? It's like, wow, how did it make you feel? What was it like? What did you do? What are you going to do about it? People are genuinely interested in the stories of other people. It's in the nature of someone who is drawn. It's like, well, chicken or the egg kind of situation. Are you drawn to those movies because you're that person? Or do you become that person because you're drawn to those movies? But it's a really interesting way to go about it. And it definitely helps us process things and move forward.
It's true. And I find that, in the eye of the general average public, you have this, horror movies are, this guy shot up a school. Yeah, well, he was watching horror movies, or, it used to be horror movies. Now it's violent video games. And I think it's missing. Before that,
it was comic books. So
before that, it was comic books. Yeah, exactly. There's always something to blame, but it's like whatever medium or genre you find that has a violent streak running through it, or at least through parts of it, because video games aren't, Monkey Island isn't violent, Civilization isn't violent, but everybody's goes like, video games are to blame, when somebody shoots up a school or whatever, and I think that's missing a fundamental aspect of what makes the horror genre what it is, because I've always found that at its best, it is a brilliant exercise in processing trauma, and I think handling life, like it helps people to handle life better, because they see perspective, they see through that they develop a kind of outlook and perspective for themselves, in a way to master life, that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be that easy.
And another thing as well is that everyone, when it comes to horror films, is always focused on the fear, because it is like the main aspect of a horror film, to be fair. But the reality of it is that a horror film is actually asking its audience to do something else. It's not asking its audience to be afraid. It's asking its audience to go into the experience with an open mind to all emotions. And going back to what you said at the very beginning about horror films, before we decided to dive into horror, as an audience member, you go in without preconceptions. And a horror fan will watch good movies and bad movies, and they'll pick out what they like and what they dislike. They'll still watch them, even the crappy ones, but you always go in and you learn to appreciate the things you like and identify the things you don't like. There's no arrogance. Oh, it's not a good movie, so I'm not going to watch it. If you're a horror fan, you will watch whatever you get your hands on. But you go into this experience and you tell in your mind, whether it's the film or a different experience, you tell the creator, I am ready to feel something. You are allowed to push the boundaries. And that gives the artists, and specifically in this case, the filmmakers, the freedom to do that. They are allowed to push the boundaries. Their audience expects that that's why they're making a horror film, because they are trying to test limits. They're trying to go further than normal films do. And they are allowing it to happen to them. They are allowing the emotions to happen. They are allowing the experience to happen. And that's what makes horror films so fascinating, because you are putting your emotional state in the hands of a stranger, and you are willingly saying, I'm ready to feel love. I'm ready to feel ecstasy. I'm ready to feel fear, and I'm ready to feel sadness, and I'm ready to feel anger. I'm ready to feel all these things. Now do what you like with me. And there's something so beautiful and weird about doing something with the human psyche as well. Another example that I love talking about when it comes to horror films is revenge films. They spend a good portion of the film tormenting the victim in order for that victim to be able to justify their revenge to the audience. And then we as self-proclaimed civilized people actually feel good when this person gets their revenge. So they're torturing people, they're killing people, and we actually physically, emotionally feel good about that. So how do you manage in a completely fictional story to get someone sitting on their own couch who is a law-abiding citizen to feel good about seeing the suffering of another person? You need to think about the psychology that happens there. It's mind-blowing what you can do. And that's what horror films are all about. It's about taking someone out of their normal environment and taking them on a trip that they usually wouldn't experience. And some people like specific kinds of horror films because they love feeling that kind of feeling. I personally love supernatural films because I love the feeling you get when you see a ghost or you're trying to exorcise a demon or whatever.
Couldn't it be, or I'm guessing it's because it's something you experience, right?
I mean, I don't know. It's relative. I think it's different with every individual. Some people want to experience things that they have no connection to in real life. And some people want to experience things that they do have a connection to in real life. But it's crazy in any case. And, you know, once all this then happens and then it's over, you know, it's like, wow, you know, I felt what I wanted to feel. So going to the point where you're like, you know, blaming a medium for it, there aren't enough studies about it. I know there are studies when it comes to like video games, but I feel like a lot of people, they kind of get their yayas out if they can actually go to a fictional medium and go through emotions that they might be bottling up in everyday life. Because there are some films, let's say you have a really sucky boss, and then you watch a film about someone taking an axe to work, which you would never in a million years do in real life. But, you know, sometimes it feels good to see someone, you know, get their justice fictionally with their crappy boss. But obviously you would never do that in real life because you're not a murderer, and that boss is probably a real human being, and they have their problems, and crap is rolling downhill, and it's always more complicated than that. But in a film, it's not about that. It's about focusing on that one aspect and feeling something you know you can't feel in real life, and then realizing maybe you should just quit your job and work somewhere else if you can. Right. So yeah, it's there's a lot of psychology going there, a lot of processing, and I do truly believe, without knowing the stats, that it does help us get through life in one way or another.
I do believe the same thing, and I think there's an argument to be made that you know, if somebody says, well, you know, horror movies are so violent, that's how people become more violent. You could say the opposite, that, you know, if there were no horror movies, more people would find other ways to, you know, more real and more painful ways to live their violent tendencies, you know. So that
it would be directed to themselves, and it would just be unhealthy.
Or it could be self-harm. Yeah.
Not everyone wants to harm physically other people. Sometimes we kind of bottle up the emotions, which is the more real danger in our society, that we don't have a vent and we get sick over it because we're not allowing ourselves to face what's bothering us, what's stressing us out, what's making us somehow seem weak in a strong society, and flawed, and emotional, whether it's for men or women, each or other genders. Each gender kind of faces as well what society expects them to be like. And it's usually not carrying your feelings and your so-called weaknesses on your sleeve, and it's not healthy. It's just not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. So if somebody, like, how do you respond to the argument? Or let me put it that way. Like earlier we said, okay, the horror films help you desensitize, or you watch more horror movies, you become desensitized to the violence, or to the dark subject matter, right? So now if somebody says, well, doesn't that then mean that this person has a lower threshold until they snap and go berserk and kill somebody?
That's a
Does
fantastic question, but it also, I didn't necessarily say that you are desensitized to the violence, because what you're desensitized to are two things. First of all, the film, because you start to look at it once you've watched enough horror films, you kind of show appreciation for the craft of it. When something looks super bloody, you don't go, "Oh my God, it's super bloody." It's like, wow, whoever they hired for special effects really made that
really
look
knew their stuff.
insane.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So that's one form of desensitization. You show more respect with growing knowledge and
You start
experience
appreciating the
for the
craft.
craft. You appreciate
Yes.
the craft. The other form of desensitization is more one for the emotional state. So getting used to the feeling of being helpless, getting used to the feeling of being scared, getting used to the feeling of being sad. That doesn't desensitize you to the situations that cause it. But it might help you process the emotions because you've had like a small version of
Because
it.
you've practiced
It's
it. Yeah.
because you've practiced
In
it.
a
I mean,
safe
it's kind of
environment.
like it's a weird comparison, but it's like when a kid has goldfish and the goldfish dies, you feel loss. But obviously, the goldfish is nothing compared to your great grandfather passing away. But it's given you a smaller, and not to like hate on goldfish, they're also living creatures and I respect
Yeah.
them too,
Yeah.
but it gives you a smaller version, and just demonstrates what it means, what life means, what death means, and what it means when a thing is just not there anymore. And then when we look at humans and experiences in horror films, death is an aspect, but again, we're tackling so many different topics, and it's just demonstrating to us what it means. And sometimes understanding an emotion is already half the battle when it comes to processing it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, when they go through something new and they've never been through it ever in their lives, or they don't know anyone in person who has been through that particular thing, you feel all these things and you don't understand why. And it can be good or bad feelings. But when something's new and you've got no one to talk to about it because no one shares that specific experience with you, you don't understand what it is you're feeling or why.
Yeah.
And whatever way you can connect to someone who is sharing that with you, because sometimes it's outside of your personal circles. It could be a group, like a self-help group. It can be a therapist. It can be a friend who secretly has gone through the same thing and never spoke about it. And it can be a horror film. Any way you can connect to people who understand how you feel will help you process it.
Yeah.
Horror films are a facet for a particular kind of people, but you should always try to find people who relate to you and help find a healthy way to process it.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. I mean, I very much can relate to or believe in that, the power of horror movies, or that horror movies allow us to face emotions that, or face traumas, right, that we may have gone through, and that I think there's a great value in looking into the dark parts of the human existence, because it isn't all flowers and rainbows. You
It's
know, there's a
not.
lot of darkness in us. There's a lot of darkness in our biographies, and there's a lot of darkness in our souls, in who we are, you know. And you can lock that away, and you should, I guess, you know. You don't want to run around acting people, you know. But you, to me, it's healthier to really explore that, to really look through that and to familiarize yourself with it, you know. It's like if you're afraid of spiders, you know, the more often, like, you spend time with spiders until you're not afraid of them anymore. You know, I find them, as a kid I was afraid of spiders, now I find them fascinating. I see one sitting somewhere, you know, and I play with it, you know, and then I put it back down. And like, that's different because I've now it's different for me, the experience I have with a spider, because it's no longer that fear. I've converted it into something else, into curiosity, you know. And I realized that the spider isn't there to scare me, you know. The spider's there to catch a fly, you know. The spider's like, I'm hanging out and I want to eat a fly, and you know, it has no intention to scare me, you know. So I think that desensitization is obviously, I mean, it's also a part of what psychologists do, you know. Like if they try to treat some sort of trauma or phobia, then, you know, they expose you to it carefully in small doses until it becomes something you can handle, until it becomes something you understand and you have a grip on, you know. Um, Still, let me rephrase that question, or let me go back to it, because I can imagine that a lot of viewers, particularly people who don't like horror movies and who don't watch horror movies, um, will wonder, how is it not clear to these two people that I'm watching on the screen right now, that if you watch a lot of violence, you become more numb to violence? Like, how is that not obvious, that if you consume violent movies or video games, or just live in this world of fear all the time, how is it not obvious that you become more of a violent person yourself? How does that not shape you? Why do you and I believe that that's not the case? Not, or, you know, why do we believe that there's other factors at play when somebody goes and shoots up a school?
Well, first of all, I would like to explore people who don't like horror films. And it sounds weird because you would think it's the majority and someone who likes horror films is weird, but
Mm.
from my point of view, it's the other way around. And the reason why a person, in my experience, doesn't like horror films was because they, at a time of their life, maybe it's connected to their age or circumstances they were going through, were exposed to a piece of horror that they were not ready for.
Mm.
And that happens a lot, especially with teenagers, because, and kids too, but mostly teenagers. You've got a party, and everyone, when you're a teenager, you're still generally trying to figure out who you are and what you like. But then you might be at a party with a group of friends, and because it's scary and you're alone, and ooh, let's do something, you put on a horror film. And some people, at whatever age that may be, might be ready for it, and some people are not. And especially when it comes to teenagers, a lot of it, when you're finding yourself, is about pushing your limits and testing yourself.
Mm.
And sadly, a lot of the films that they then choose to watch are not appropriate for everyone sitting in the room. And it can also be, it doesn't have to be at a party with friends. It could be a scary story that you hear at a sleepover. It could be a film that your parents watched in the living room and you were like hiding around the corner because they didn't know you weren't asleep yet, and you heard or saw something you weren't ready for. And it's not just violence, it's sexuality as well. which in my opinion is even more dangerous because we grow up and most of us are sexually active, but most of us won't become violent adults. So it has way more of an influence, and there is sexuality in horror films too, way more an influence on that than it will on our violent behavior. But the fact of the matter is, if you weren't ready for your first horror experience, in whatever way, then you will feel so repulsed and so uncomfortable and so disturbed that you will grow up thinking, I don't like horror films. And that sadly was just bad education or upbringing when it came to that. Because in reality, what you're supposed to do is take things that people already like and then find a horror equivalent of that, and then grow their tolerance level to films gradually as they mature in what they can process. And if you don't like horror films, then my guess is you've had bad experiences in real life when it comes to factors you affiliate with the horror genre. And I'm very sorry that that's the case, but maybe you should give it a try with something that's a little more on the different end of the scale, to maybe see if there's a way you can free yourself of that. Because anytime you hear about anything that you are generally completely opposed to, then there are emotions there you haven't processed. If anything makes you feel any kind of way, if you're sitting on the train and someone checks your ticket and you are offended that they looked at you and didn't just assume you had a ticket to be on the train, but they actually wanted to check your ticket, if you're offended by that, then you have a problem with not feeling trusted. Process that. Think about that. If someone says, oh, you've gained weight, and for some reason you feel upset about that, even if it's true, then maybe you need to process something. Like, I mean, my weight, for example, goes up and down. People notice, and I really don't care, but it's because I'm comfortable. But there was a time in my life when I wasn't comfortable if someone commented on it, but that meant I had something to process.
Yeah, that's
if
true.
anyone says or shows you anything that is in the realm of what people just generally do or produce, and a lot of people watch horror films and they are upstanding citizens, if you feel like horror films are a problem and you feel like something is wrong about it, then maybe you should think about where that opposition comes from. Process that, think about it, wonder why, and it could be legitimate. I actually believe that you have been through something that made horror films horrible for you. But what was it exactly that gave you that opinion? What were the many things over the course of your life that contributed to that picture that that's the case?
But let me play devil's advocate there. I mean, somebody might just respond to you now. It's easier than that. I just watched a horror movie. It scared me. I don't like being scared. But then at the same time,
film
could be. But then at the same time, a lot of people go through life and they don't like horror movies. They never watch them. They're perfectly fine. They also don't judge people who like horror movies, that's I think is the core. Like that, everybody obviously has every right to like and dislike what they like or dislike, and you can make a case for horror movies and say, you know what, give it a try. You might find something very intellectually stimulating. It might open your mind. It might expand your horizons a little. But people choose not to, and they're perfectly fine nonetheless. The problem, of course, is if I get judged for what my hobby is. Like if somebody judges me because I like horror movies, then that's I don't think that's fair. But then, yeah, like I'm saying,
but hold
somebody
on,
might just say,
going to comment on that
okay,
real quick
cool.
before you continue, because the problem is mostly the stigma, and there are a lot of films that people watch and they're not aware that they're horror films. I mean, if you think of films like Alien or Jurassic Park, guess what? Those are horror films.
Yeah,
And a lot
totally.
of people who say, I don't watch horror films, will still have seen Jurassic Park because it's Jurassic Park.
Yeah, and that's a
And it's
horror
like,
film. Yeah.
are you aware? But I remember going into a bookstore here in Germany, and it was a really nice bookstore. I like going to bookstores. They smell great. I like grabbing a coffee. I like just seeing what's out there and then taking something home with me. And this was like, and obviously, you know, whether it's like a big bookstore that belongs to a chain or something small and independent, I like supporting them all, you know, like, you know, spreading those oats, if you will. But I was in an independent small bookshop, and I really liked it. It was cozy, and they had lots of different books. And then I asked someone who worked there, like, "Hey, do you also do horror books?" And she just was so dismissive, and she says, "No, we don't sell that kind of thing here."
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, wait, so you only have the crime novels about murder, but you don't have Victorian ghost stories?"
Yeah.
And she was like, I'm like, "No, it's okay. I know now." And that's the thing. It's like a lot of people who, for example, will read a crime novel, which is to me way closer to reality and actual horrible things
You know what? Yeah.
but horror, because they think horror is whatever they think it is, and they will just dismiss it
Yeah.
so horribly. And I'm like, you are aware of the hypocrisy, right?
Yeah. It's funny because yesterday I started rewatching Columbo with my girlfriend, and I watched it when I was a kid, when it and dubbed in German, and then like I think in 2009 or something, I bought the DVD sets and I watched it in English, and then yesterday we started again and we watched the first episode, and the cold-blooded way the murderer plots um, his murder, like what he's going to do, and then the way he kills his wife. It is pretty, like it's set up pretty. They take their time. They introduce the whole thing. They introduce his plot. They introduce what he's going to do, and it is pretty
Dark.
intense. It's dark and
Yeah.
intense, you know. And that's Columbo. You
Yeah.
know, like that's a crime TV show that you can show any kid that's like after above the age of 7, 8, 9 years, they can watch Columbo. You know,
Yeah.
totally.
Exactly.
But it
And
is at its core. That's a pretty dark thing that happens in that
yeah.
show. You
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. And that's why I think, you know, first of all, we need to kind of let go of the stigmas, and we need to honestly reflect what it is we're saying and what it is we're talking about, and claim to know what we're talking about. I mean, that's generally always a thing. Question everything. Question what other people say, question what you think,
Yeah.
and just be clever and logical about it. But then when it comes to like violence, there is such a big difference between fiction and reality. And before I start like forbidding horror films, I am more likely to hit the streets and ask for schools to hire psychologists to do
Absolutely.
psych evaluations of students.
Because that what needs to happen. Like we need to care more for people, and like, sorry, I mean, there's one solution that's easy, and there's one solution that requires a lot of patience and effort.
Yeah.
And the latter is the right one. The easy one is saying,
Exactly.
yeah, ban horror movies. But sorry, that's not. No, you're not helping that way.
You have to be somehow not stable, not quite balanced human being to actually commit a crime,
Yeah.
and not understand that what you're consuming as a medium is fiction. I know that there are, especially older horror films, where it's kind of a weird line to cross, because especially, you know, a few decades ago, animal cruelty, actual animal
Oh my God,
cruelty,
yeah.
was an element of horror films, and we don't like that these days.
Yeah.
You're not really allowed to anymore. And a lot of horror fans say, I don't care if it's a classic, I refuse to watch this movie
Yeah, same
because
here,
of that.
actually.
And that's where you blur the lines a little bit, like Cannibal Holocaust or whatever.
Yeah.
But to these days, it's regulated. It's kind of like, if it's legal, it has to be regulated, and it's all fiction. It's all fiction. And as long as, don't be afraid of the people who are talking about the fictional aspect of violence. Be more afraid of the people who are not talking about it, because God knows what they do behind closed doors. And it's really important to find the actual problems, and the actual problems don't start when you watch a movie. For someone to actually commit a violent crime, and not regard the rest as fiction, but as inspiration or a playbook or whatever you want to call it, that person is already messed up. Yeah. And there's something in their real life that, even if they've never committed the crime before, is lurking under the surface and is waiting to explode. And that person needs help that goes beyond the TV they watch. So, anyway,
totally.
That's my opinion on it.
Yeah, and you couldn't have said it better. Let's take another break. Also, I think we're more than 3 hours in at this point, which is nuts.
I don't
like this time just flew by.
I know you can edit it down to whatever you want.
I'm not editing anything. I mean, no, probably not. I don't like editing, but I think the uncut conversation is what makes this interesting. But yeah, we should get to a point. We should slowly find a way towards the end. But
I don't need to take a break if you don't need to. We can kind of just keep going till we're done.
Let's take a quick break, okay, and then come back. And there are a few more subjects that I want to touch upon. As far as I'm concerned, I could do this another 1.5 hours easily, no problem. But yeah, I think that's going to be a lot. And we can always reconvene at a later date and discuss other subjects as well. But there's a few.
Or you can split it into like 3 parts and say part 1.
That's probably what's going to happen. Exactly.
Sleep paralysis. Part 2, horror films and violence.
Exactly.
And part 3,
whatever's coming next. Whatever the hell's coming next.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to go into, because we talked about coping mechanism, people who like horror have survived something, and how that helps you face things that you experience, fears that you experience, trauma that you experience. But also we've touched on the subject of dark humor, and I want to go into dark humor a little bit more. And then I want to go into a little bit back into your life and sort of close the circle, and ask a few core questions that I believe belong in every episode of this podcast, just to wrap it up. But this is going to be more like a quick fire type of thing.
That's cool. I found, by the way, the link to the trailer with the song that I was telling you about before.
I was going to ask about that. Good thing you mentioned it.
I sent it to you on Facebook and Messenger.
That would be great. That is great. Yeah, thank you very much. And totally, I'm going to link to that trailer. You guys should check it out, because that's the trailer we talked about with the music, and the door creaking noise, right?
Yeah, we're slamming, but yeah.
Slamming, thank you. Sorry. And yeah, it will be very interesting for me too to watch that, because I haven't seen it. Okay, so we'll be back in a few minutes, or if you're watching this, in a few seconds. Bye. So long.
Bye. See you in a bit.
And we're back. Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for still being around, for one person who's still there. Hi. Hi, Mom.
The hardcore.
The hardcore. Yeah, thanks for yeah, seriously, I'm happy for anybody who's watching this, and I hope you guys are getting something out of this. I find it truly inspiring and very, very interesting to talk about this subject, and to talk to you, Mariam. We're covering a lot of ground here, and it's hopefully as cool for you watching this as it is for us having this conversation. So there's an expiration date now. We have about 20 minutes left. So whatever happens, that's what we need to do. We need to finish by then. There's a couple more subjects that I wanted to touch upon. So some of these are going to be rapid fire.
Oh my God.
But
I don't know if I can handle the pressure.
I know, right? It's going to be horrible.
I'm good. I'm good to go. I'm ready for it.
Wonderful. Let's do this.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready. Bring it. Bring it. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Hit me. No, I'm kidding. Let's do
Dark
this.
humor. That's what I wanted to get back to. We were talking about horror as a coping mechanism, horror as a way of handling certain things in life, and also just finding your footing in life, and perhaps living your life in a more balanced, sane, healthy way by having this sort of outlet or this sort of mirror that horror is holding up to you as a person or to us as a society. Um, and getting some critical insight out of that. But we also touched on the idea that, as a horror fan, you develop a certain dark kind of humor. The same kind of dark humor that I've experienced with people working in hospitals. When I was doing my social service, which is something we had to do in Germany after finishing school, you could either go into the army or you could do like a year of social service. I was working in a hospital and death was all around us. It was old people and many of them came and then didn't leave because they died. And you had a you, you had a dark, sick sense of humor in there as well. Like the
I'm
nurses
sorry, just to clarify, I'm not laughing about people
about
dying.
people dying.
I'm laughing about how you phrased it because you're like, oh, they came and they never left. And for a brief
I
moment, I
know.
was like, oh, did they start working there? And then you're like, because they died. I was like, oh. And then I kind of laughed over my stupidity because that's exactly what we're talking about right now. Just to clarify things, I am just not smart enough to keep up.
But yeah, you develop that kind of dark humor. My girlfriend actually works in as a psychotherapist, and she has a sick, dark kind of humor. And it's also a way of coping with things that otherwise would crush you. That doesn't mean we're belittling them. That doesn't mean we're taking them less seriously. It means that we're finding a sick sense of fun in them, to twist the perspective around a little, and accept it as a part of life, that we deal with somehow. So that's sort of my little prelude to this subject. Dark humor. You mentioned that, as a horror movie fan, you develop that kind of dark humor. How do you feel that manifests for you in life, and also how do you feel that manifests in horror movies? Let's say you have movies like the Evil Dead, at least 2 and 3, or the TV show they did, Ash versus Evil Dead, which is hilarious in a sick and depraved kind of way. Um, yeah, I'm wondering how that what your take is on that, the idea of dark humor and horror.
So, okay, I need to unpack this slowly,
Yeah.
even though it's supposed to be quick fire. But
No, this is
generally,
probably still going to take a moment. Yeah.
generally, when you've experienced certain things and you watch horror movies or you've experienced them in real life, you learn to observe things very differently. You look for more details. You're not focused on what might be the focal point for a lot of other people. You really try to paint a picture with different details in mind, really. So you start perceiving real life situations in general very differently from other people. So, for example, you could be at a funeral, and whilst most people would be like, oh, how sad someone passed away, and then you look at maybe the family and you see that they're crying, and you're like, oh, feel pain because that person passed away. But then you might also pan the room and be like, why is that person on their phone? Why is that person sitting so close to the buffet? Why is that person, touching their partner inappropriately at a funeral? And then you just start looking for other stuff to paint more of a picture instead of being focused on the thing that usually growing up in an environment you're more prone to focus on when it comes to that kind of situation. Now, obviously, I intentionally took a funeral because it's very symbolic for tragedy, but it applies to all situations. Um, and then you kind of get into this mindset, if you do develop that dark sense of humor, where it's not about laughing at horrible things all the time, because especially when the horrible thing is unraveling especially if it's not your horrible thing, but it's someone else's, you're still going to try to be supportive and understanding of it if there's still something you can do, if you can offer support or if you can find a solution. I think the humor then crops up with a lot of people, including myself, when the thing has already happened and there's nothing you can do about it. So you're powerless. And all you can really do is kind of make light of it to just get it out and not feel like a victim. And simultaneously, it can happen as well, humor, if you are currently going through the horrible situation and you're really doing all you can to make the best of it. And then the rest is waiting it out. And so if it's your own personal problem, you crack a few jokes about it. I have friends who are even currently going through cancer, for example. And I am staying positive that they'll pull through, but they will joke about it. They'll joke about the incompetence of the doctors, about the fact that maybe information was hidden from them. Like, oh, what do you mean it's spread there and there? Well, thanks for letting me know. They'll joke about buying different wigs and how some of them will look great and some of them won't. Now, I wouldn't make these jokes about their situation, but they're making these jokes about their situation. And I'm not going to be like, how inappropriate. Why aren't you more visibly sad to the public about what you're going through? Wrong. That person is entitled to process it however way they want to. And if it makes them feel better to just for a brief moment forget that they have this life-threatening disease and crack a joke about an ugly wig that they bought off of Amazon, then go for it. You know, that is what you are entitled to do, and you deserve those moments that will just generally help you through the situation the best way that you can get through it. And then simultaneously, the helplessness of having been through something, whenever you feel helpless, whenever the determining factors of an outcome or something having happened, if that's out of your hands, then you can either sit there and be sad, and you are very well entitled to. It's very important to mourn. It's very important to go through that process. But also some people cope with it by just making light of it and joking about it because it's out of their hands, and it helps them feel like they've accepted the helplessness by gaining some sort of control back by joking about it and laughing about it. Laughter gives you power over certain situations. Now, obviously, sometimes have a dark sense of humor and no tact, and they might make jokes about situations or people that they really shouldn't be. And that's not okay.
Yeah.
Try to read the room. And that's not tied to horror fans. It's human in general. Read the room, understand what position you're in. Are you the one who is helpless? Are you the one who's allowed to be making these jokes? Or is it someone else's right and you can only support them by joining in? So that's a really touchy subject. And there are for sure situations where that's not clear. Like, what am I allowed to say and what am I not? And God knows, regardless of tragedies, I have surely said things that were not appropriate for the circumstances, and I was too daft to notice and probably only realize either in hindsight, if at all, because I am a clumsy human being. But simultaneously, and again, this self-deprecating, the humor, me calling myself clumsy is also me kind of dealing with the fact that I've done stupid stuff and there's nothing I can
acknowledging
do about it now.
that you're not above
it.
the
I'm
rest.
not perfect. Right, exactly. At the time when I'm in a situation, I will always do the best I can to be a decent human being. But if I've said the wrong thing by accident, like I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I'm going to think, okay, what can you take away from that? What can you learn?
Yeah.
And how can you do it differently in the future?
That's right.
But I'm not going to beat myself up about it. It's not going to help anyone for me to feel miserable. But not everyone shares that philosophy, and I get it. That's absolutely fine. Some people do beat themselves up about that, but they also feel like only then have they learned the lesson if they make sure they feel horrible about it for the next night or few years or whatever. That's their way of coping with the situation. So anyway, humor, dark sense of humor. Yes, we can talk about horror film fans or horror fans, because again, a lot of people have just been through something. So these coping mechanisms, they're kind of detached from the horror films. I think the affinity to horror films might come from someone who's had the same experiences as someone who's developed dark sense of humor. And I compared horror to comedy in terms of where you go after you've survived something, because a lot of comedians, a lot of people who love to make people laugh, they're also trying to get out of something that they are having difficulties processing. And for all the tragedy they've experienced, they want to give other people the gift of joy to somehow balance that out. Whereas horror fans, don't, they take a different approach.
Yeah, you should watch. I very, very highly recommend this to anybody watching this. You should watch the episode of Joe Rogan's podcast where he has Nikki Glaser as a guest, who's a fellow comedian. And Joe Rogan being a comedian these days, and then he used to host X Factor in the United States in the 90s. But he has one of the biggest podcasts in the world, for those who don't know. I'm sure you do. But so he has Nikki Glaser on, and like for the first, and it's also a very long conversation. I'm going to say 3 hours or something. But for the first half of it, give or take, or let's say 2/3, they talk about all kinds of different things, a lot about porn and what kind of porn she likes to watch. And it's very, very, very funny. Like, it's dark, it's dirty, and it's raunchy, but it's incredibly funny. Like, it's side-splittingly funny. And then all of a sudden, it just takes this left turn, and they talk about depression and how comedians, they have that in them, and how she's dealing with that and how she's trying to cope with it. And it's very, very interesting. If you want to go into a little bit deeper, or just firsthand experience listen to somebody talk about what Mariam just mentioned, that, comedians too often come from a place of darkness and turn that into laughter. That's a very good example.
Well, mental illness in itself is something that is that has awareness raised quite a bit in the horror community, and not because it's more present in the horror community than in other groups of people, but because there is this attitude of being able to speak about it quite openly.
Yes.
And sometimes some mental illnesses are treatable with the right therapy, but sometimes it's something that's chronic or that's chemical. And it's really just about living with something that not everyone has as a predisposition. But it's very important. And it's weird because mental illness and awareness of that has become such a buzzword. A lot of people talk about depression. A lot of people talk about some really difficult conditions. And for as much as we've started talking about these things, there's still less of a grasp or an understanding of what it is and how to deal with it. And my experience is that in the horror community, there's a different approach. It's not just about tweeting something or writing something on Facebook to get some sort of reactions, or crying in a YouTube blog to have people say, well, I think you're great. It's about actual exchange of experiences, and sometimes just saying, hey, I have friends who sometimes say, hey, I'm not feeling great today. If anyone's got the time, could you just hit me up? And obviously you don't see it as a comment underneath, but you know that they're getting DMs from whoever has the time the moment this thing pops up, and just checks in on them. I've done it before. Like, I've messaged people and I'm like, what's up? Just tell me about it. And it's more about having a community that accepts that this is the reality of many people's lives, and without sensationalism still offers dialogue and comfort and either advice or really just an open ear. And that's something that I wish was done more. We're already talking so much about mental illness, but I wish that genuine and healthy way of dealing with it as a community. I wish that was more of a thing in every pocket of society. And sadly, again, I think it's not. I think often it's either superficial or it's not talked about at all. And a lot of people who would say how important it is to tackle these issues will still not be honest about maybe the issues they have themselves that they should be tackling. And it's such a touchy subject. It's so difficult. And obviously, people need to be ready. But if you know that you're surrounded by a community of people that will listen if you have something to say, it's easier to get to a point where you feel ready to deal with it yourself. It's a very difficult subject, but yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Oh my God, we could there's so many more things that I want to say and that I want to touch on. I think we're gonna have to cut out a few things that I wanted to talk about. I'm gonna mention them so you guys know what we're not gonna talk about. First thing I wanted to dive into, and I hope we have this chance in the future, is your biography, which I announced at the beginning, and we barely did. I mean, that's not true. We didn't.
That's why we did the predictions, because we wanted to see what we predicted the same as what happens.
But I'm stating that's the mission of my podcast, and then we just talk about one subject for 3.5 hours. But we did talk about we did talk about your career and how you got to where you are now. But I wanted to go a little bit further back, and we'll have to do this at another point.
On another time, at another day.
Yeah, exactly, because you are an American living in Germany, and I want to know that story.
I'm also half Iranian, half American.
Well, wow, there we go. I want to know. I want to go back to how were you born in the States? And don't answer this now because we don't have time. But that's what I was going to answer. Or that's what I was going to ask, and then I wanted to talk about few just core questions, and we are going to do these now in a rapid fire way. One question that I'm always going to ask is, what guiding purpose, and I'm going to ask this in two ways so you can choose which one you answer. What guiding purpose do you see for yourself in life? So what kind of mission do you have? Or if you want to put it that way, what kind of impact do you want to have on the world and people?
That is a quick fire question. How dare you?
I know, man. I know it probably takes time. But
okay, I'll try to answer it as briefly as possible.
If you had to condense it,
I think so. I want to live my life as someone who is flawed but still does good, and I want to live by example and inspire other people to embrace who they are in all facets, whether they're saints, sinners, or probably both, and still do good things. So I want to live by example when it comes to that core philosophy. That's it. Quick fire answer.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And through what you do now, through your work in the horror movie industry, or entertainment industry, how do you feel? In which way do you feel you're actualizing that mission?
I think that because of my resume and my experience, resume in a metaphorical sense, I've somehow been able to connect the horror community with the rest of the world, because I can speak with both sides, and found a level of communication to articulate what the horror community is about. And I'm hoping that a lot of those really strong values that are represented in the horror community, I can somehow demonstrate to other pockets of society and inspire maybe more stale, conventional, old-fashioned industries to rethink how they've been handling things and how they could grow moving forward. I think that whether I work as a host or a producer or a networker, I'm constantly doing that in all my projects.
Yeah. I really like what you said. You're connecting the horror community with the rest of the world. I think that's a very core statement here that came through by everything we said today. We're gonna close with two things. First, I would like to, for people who are who've seen this and listen to us now and go, Well, perhaps it's time to reevaluate horror movies. Perhaps there's one that I should give a shot. Um, could we each recommend three horror movies and just say one or two lines about why we recommend them? Because
Mhm.
oftentimes then there's horror movies that are just plain old fun, that are just silly slapstick fun. Let's not uh we didn't really touch on that a lot, but The Evil Dead or A Cabin in the Woods, right? Or Scream. They're more like they also have some deeper meaning, but they're not the heavy subject matter that we just talked about for 3.5 hours. And these movies are obviously all also out there. And then there's the Human Centipede, which is just disgusting. And so those movies exist too. Um, but what would we recommend out of the type of horror movie that we just talked about um, to somebody who would be willing to see watch a movie and think about how that's a metaphor for something else, or just evaluate that movie afterwards and think about it for a while? What would we recommend?
So it depends on again what you can expose yourself to and what you can't. But if you want to see a film that works with a lot of tension and fear and kind of plays into like the, I guess, expectations, but stays in like an old Victorian style, I would recommend the original The Others.
As in
If
the
you,
2001.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're going. I heard they're going to make a remake, but
Oh God.
let's go with the
Yeah.
original
Watch.
first.
Yeah. Brilliant movie.
If you want to see a nice independent film that discusses mental illness and how the environment of a person copes with that, um, then there is a fantastic Canadian film called Dead Dicks.
Heard of
Uh,
that.
it's a really good one. I would definitely recommend that. Um, and let's see, well, what will the third topic be? If you want to see something that keeps you confused till the very end, and this is also, it's a newer film. It's maybe like 2 or 3 years old from Japan, and it's called Tag.
Okay.
And if you are into like pop culture and gaming and whatnot, um, watch that. It's Japanese, but it's not what you may think, like The Ring or The Grudge. It's really confusing. Um, yeah, and again, there is some like gore, so be prepared for that. So those are three random ones off the top of my head.
Yeah.
There's so many films that I can
Yeah. It's hard to
recommend,
start where it's hard to know where to start, right?
but I
Um.
would start with those.
Yeah.
If you're a horror beginner, then the others, and you're not afraid of fear, then the others might be for you.
The Others is a really
Um,
good one. Yeah.
if you want to dive deep into the human psyche and do some really heavy watching, Dead Dicks is good. And if you just want to be like confused and entertained and don't mind a bit of gore, without it being realistic at all, then Tag is the recommendation. So those
Gotcha.
are three very
Yeah.
different films. I could recommend more, but I would start with those.
Yeah. Cool. Well, three that come to my mind off the top of my head. I've mentioned a few anyway. I've mentioned Starship Troopers, which isn't, it's more like science fiction. It's not necessarily a horror movie, but if you haven't seen it, do watch it. It's brilliant because it works on many levels and it's very, very, very smart. Um, but I'm that's not one of the three I'm going to recommend. So what I'm going to recommend first is actually a show, a TV show. We mentioned it before. The Haunting of Hill House. I just recently watched that, and it's like the tension is incredible. The build-up, the way the characters are written, the way the characters are fleshed out is fantastic. And it goes a lot into it. It is about a family being haunted by their past and being haunted by ghosts. So there is that supernatural. There are actual ghosts in that story. But what it what it really explores is what it does to people if having a childhood trauma, living with that, and how that can estrange family members from each other, and how that can reverberate through their lives and fuck them up. So that's a really, really good one. and you're going to be hooked to it. You're going to be really addicted to it. Like me and my girlfriend, we watched that in just a few days. And then another one that's really good metaphor as well for grief and trying to overcome loss is the Babadook.
Babadook. I knew
Yeah.
you were gonna say it. It's a
Right?
great
When I
film.
mentioned grief, right?
Watch it.
Yeah.
The grief, like, Babadook. It's a
Yeah.
really good film.
It's a
Yes,
really
he's right.
very good
Matt is
film.
right.
It's very thought provoking, and you do need to look a little closer and try to understand what it's really about, because it is about, on the surface, it's about somebody dealing with a monster, but that's, there's a meaning. And then another one that I just find is just damn cool and not enough people have seen is called Triangle. It's from 2009. It's about a woman going on a sailing trip that goes pretty badly. And I'm not going to spoil more of it because that movie, just watch it without knowing anything. Don't read up on it. It's called Triangle. It's from 2009. The name of the director is Christopher. Do you know? Christopher something.
No,
But
I'm
anyway,
horrible
yeah.
with names.
Yeah, if you Google Triangle 2009, you're gonna find it. And then I don't think it's on Netflix. Find it somewhere, buy it on Amazon Prime or something. It is very, very highly recommended, and you're gonna think about it. Not necessarily because of the characters, but because of what you just watched. It's really, really good. Not
Could I
not much
recommend
gore,
some more?
just a ton of tension.
Could I
Yeah,
recommend some
go.
more stuff? I know you said
We have
only three, but
we have
I
a few
just
minutes.
keep. Okay. So I recommend a low budget sci-fi with horror elements from Poland called I Am Ren. I saw that in this year's festival circuit, so I don't know where the distribution is at yet.
Mhm.
But considering it's a Polish production, and I have not seen many Polish films, and I had the pleasure of also speaking to the director and the main actress. It's a really good film, really good. I definitely recommend it. I Am Ren. Another film I want to recommend, and this is already in circulation, is called Harpoon, directed by Rob Grant. And it's basically done like a theater play. It's really only three actors in a small space. And it's about three people, three friends trapped on a boat in the middle of the sea. Again, so well written, so tense, and really great to watch. And in terms of TV series, another two that I'd like to recommend, if you haven't already seen it, is the French series Mariam,
Yes,
which
you mentioned that.
is about an author who does horror books and she returns to her hometown and weird things are happening. And the other series is the Grudge series. Now, there are lots of Grudge movies, and usually I'm like, well, hit and miss. But they made a series. It's a little hard to process because it does have violent moments at times, but it's produced fantastically. And both Marianne and the Grudge series are on Netflix, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So those are some more that I'd like to throw out there. Oh my God, I could sit
Marianne-
here for hours just recommending it.
Marianne is French, and the Grudge series is Japanese, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah.
Both are on Netflix. I saw Marianne. I looked it up. That's definitely on Netflix, and I'm pretty sure the Grudge as well.
Yeah,
So,
it is.
okay. Well, thanks to everybody for watching. I hope you guys had a good time.
I need to plug some stuff.
Yes, you do. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the one most important thing for me that I need to plug is that I am now co-hosting and co-producing an online horror entertainment news series called The Grimm Exchange. It is on YouTube, on the channel for GRIMMFEST TV. That is the name of the channel. It's under the banner of GRIMMFEST, which is one of the largest horror film festivals in the UK. The show is a bi-weekly series. So although we have plenty of content coming out on the channel between episodes, the episodes themselves will be every 2 weeks on a Friday. And it started on Friday the 13th. November
Perfect.
2020, yes.
Yesterday.
And it basically consists of headlines, deep dives into subgenres, interviews with filmmakers and film reviews, and also fun segments that are all around, whether it's literature or games or cosplay or whatever. It's a nice mix of stuff. So lighthearted horror entertainment news show, both for fans and people from the industry. Make sure to check out The Grimm Exchange.
Yes. I'm going to link to it,
crap
obviously.
out of that.
Yeah.
Woo! Yes, link in the description down below. So yeah, that was what I wanted to plug. That's the main thing today.
Nice. But you said two things?
No.
So both
wait.
the channel and...
Well, I mean the show mostly. I can't think if
Yeah.
there was something else and I should be plugging right
Gotcha.
now. But
Okay.
that is the current
Perfect.
plug.
And I'm really looking forward to it. And if I understood correctly, that's the one where you also interview people about their personal creepy experiences.
Oh yes, links in the description down below. But the people that we've been interviewing for the first few episodes, they have been sharing their real life spooky stories. There are 3 episodes of that you can check out online. Each one is
I'm really
is
looking
about
forward to
12 minutes, 15 minutes long. So
Nice.
yeah, totally dig into that. Maybe
Cool.
longer. Who knows? Yeah.
Well, then this is it. Thanks a lot. We are now going to record the little clip that you saw at the beginning of this video, which is going to tell you what this video is about. Now we know. Now we can tell you. So see you in a few minutes at the beginning of this video. If you jump back or something, I don't know. I don't know how time works. Anyway,
Time is
it's
relative,
wibbly
my
wobbly.
friend.
All right. Have a good one. Oh, and if you like this, click subscribe. What was the holy trinity of YouTube? Click subscribe, like,
Comment.
and comment.
Like.
Thank you. Yeah, please do any of these things. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.